Well, welcome everybody in the room. Good afternoon, everybody watching live or subsequently listening to this in a replay mode. For those who aren't in the room and are listening in, I thought you might be interested to know that you're going to be one of something like 1,200 to 1,400 people who now seem to regularly watch the public board meetings of CQC. So welcome. So this is the public board meeting of CQC on the 24th of May. A few introductions briefly, if I could. Jeremy Boss, who is the interim chair of our audit committee, is listening in online, but he's not physically in the room, but he's observing the meeting. I'd like to welcome Blessing Hale over there. She's the Equality Network representative for this month, so welcome, Blessing. We have Jane Chidgey-Clark and Luz Ansari from the National Guardian, excuse me, and Healthwatch England, respectively. They're going to be presenting to us later on today, but they're joining us the whole afternoon, so welcome to both of you. And then last but no means least, hopefully down to my far left, I can see Nina Martin, who's our new corporate secretary, who will be helping us with the minutes and other things. So for those of you who know most of the faces and regularly watching, a new face for Nina. Nina, welcome. Let's move straight on to the formal business of the meeting. Do we have any conflicts of interest, new conflicts of interest to declare? There seem to be none. I haven't been notified of anything urgent that people want to raise. Anything from anybody? No? Apologies for the noise there. Okay. So let's move straight on to the first item. Those of you watching online will know from the agenda you'll have seen that this is the listening, learning and responding to concerns. We've shown on the agenda it's the management response and action plan. I thought it might be helpful to give some introductory remarks to this session, both from my perspective and the wider board's perspective, and also explain how we'll use the next 30 minutes. So the context, this is to consider management's response to the reports that we saw at the board meeting last time. So certainly for the non-executives on the board, that was the first time we'd seen those reports. We commented on them at the time. They weren't great reading, but the recommendations at a high level were broadly accepted, but there was no time to go into the detail then. So this session is primarily to consider management's responses. For those who have read the papers, I should explain it does refer on a number of occasions there to the board proposals. I mean, the board individual board members have had the opportunity to feed comments and observations in over the course of the last couple of months since our last board meeting. And those, where they're being given, are reflected in the paper. So I think that's why the paper says, the board. But to be quite clear, the board has seen all of these papers, that paper, the action plan that follows, for the first time today. So the board as a whole, and particularly the NEDs who have seen less of it, are being asked to approve what is proposed. I would suggest as well that while we don't want to lose focus on the LLR report, and I'm certainly not suggesting we do, but I think probably helpful as well just to see it in the wider context. The work was commissioned in response, among other things, to pulse survey results last year, which were not good. Many of us have had the opportunity over the course of the last few months to meet and engage with other colleagues as well, not least by attending some of the operations conferences that Tyson has run. So, we now have other sources of information. So let's stay focused on the LLR, but recognising the wider context of the issues that we are seeking to address, which are around the concerns of our people, and in particular the concern about the extent to which we're listened. I think it's right to say, I know I'm speaking on behalf of all my board colleagues to say that we'd rather not be in this position, but we are, and as a board, we're sorry for the impact that whatever has happened has had on some of our staff. So let me make that clear. As I say, we've 8 weeks have elapsed since we saw the findings, and we were lucky at the time to have in the room the people that have worked primarily on those two reports. So we now want to consider things in a little bit more detail. What I'm going to suggest is that I'm going to ask Ian Trenholm as the Chief Executive to introduce the papers and say a bit more about management's response and approach. Then give an opportunity for colleagues, all of board colleagues, but I guess in particular for the non-executives that didn't write the detail of the paper, to respond or give any questions they wish to ask in relation to the paper. And blessing, if appropriate, very happy for you to comment as well. I would ask colleagues, we've allowed half an hour for this for what is already quite a long meeting. So I think comments, if I could ask people, both the questions and the responses to be to the point and brief, if we could do. And then once we've finished those, we'll try to get through that within a half hour, and I'll wrap up with what I think is a summary from the points we've raised. So if that's okay with everybody, Ian, could I ask you to talk a bit about the management's response?
Thanks very much, Ian. As you said, we're here today to consider the action plan arising from the listening, learning and responding to concerns review that was presented last month. I think it'd be fair to say it was an upsetting report in one sense. It's upsetting that we got here, and I think it's also fair to say that we could have done better individually and collectively as an organisation. And I think just to reinforce the apology that I've made to colleagues internally, but I'm just reiterate the point Ian's made and other colleagues have made, is that I'm really sorry about the impact that some of the activities, some of the things that were cited in the report have had on colleagues, and I think we are all keen to do better and improve. I appreciate the candour and honesty with which everyone has approached the work. Lots of people contributed to the work, and that's given us a true, if somewhat uncomfortable picture. And I'm particularly also grateful for those who led this work internally and those people from outside CQC who've supported and challenged us in equal measure. I think without their contribution, the work would have been the poorer. And it is a comprehensive piece of work with many facets to it. I know it would be fair to say that we are all absolutely committed to ensuring that this work moves forward in a way that genuinely makes a difference. And I think that genuinely making a difference is the key thing here. Our strategy is ambitious. We've talked about our strategy in many of these board meetings in the past. We are ambitious in areas such as safety, improvement, and tackling inequalities in the wider health and care system. But for us to be successful in delivering that strategy, we need people in the wider population to feel that they can talk to us openly, and that we can be confident about having tough conversations about topics such as race, be that internally with our own colleagues or with providers, or indeed how our colleagues describe the performance of individual providers. If we're going to make a difference and genuinely deliver on the strategy, we need to be confident in these areas. The 5 work streams from the report made some 80 recommendations. And responding to these recommendations, these 80 recommendations, as a combined package of activity will require coordinated and careful work. But our mindset must be focused on making a real difference. I explicitly don't just want to quickly tick off the items on the list. I think we've had some suggestions that we should just get on with it and just get some things done. I explicitly don't want to do that because I think that would be too easy, and it wouldn't make the difference that we all aspire to. We may need to course correct as we go. It's going to take us probably a fair period of time, probably at least 18 months to complete some of these actions, but complete them in a way that makes a difference. We may, as the external world changes, need to course correct. As we see how effective some of the early work is and how impactful it is, we may need to do things in a slightly different way. And some actions which appear the right and proper now may actually become less relevant over time. And there are some areas where we may need the help and collaboration of others. Many areas are not things that can be delivered by those around this table alone. We need our colleagues, we need our networks, we need our trades unions, and we need providers to be with us on this journey, because I don't think there's anything in the report that everyone isn't absolutely committed to taking forward. But it's a question of how we do that in the most effective way. This paper outlines the response to each recommendation, the leadership of the outcomes, and the way we're going to carry out a structured evaluation programme. The structured evaluation programme is a vital part of the review, and it's probably what sets it apart from many other similar reviews. There were a series of pieces of learning, but baking in an evaluation approach into the report was a really important part of what the report was about. And that means that there is clarity and transparency around what success looks like. And most importantly, there's clarity and transparency around impact and the difference that we're going to make. I think this is a comprehensive approach, and I think it demonstrates in really tangible terms how seriously and I know everybody around this table is taking this review. Some of the actions are already in train within our people plan, or plans are already in our transformation programme, and again the transformation programme plans have been reviewed against the actions from this review. Some things will be incorporated into existing programmes of work and existing activity, and of course some activity is genuinely new. Ian, I know Kate Staples is happy to talk about how she's going to offer the leadership to bring all of this work together, and the individual exec team colleagues stand ready to answer the questions of NED colleagues to understand the detail of how the next phases of this will work. So Ian, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Kate, we all come to you one way or another later on, but perhaps let's just pause from management now, and I invite the board colleagues. I guess I can look in particularly at my non-executive colleagues, any questions they would like to ask. Belinda.
Thank you. So I've got a couple of questions. So my first question is, it's obviously very concerning for everybody that the review highlights that we don't offer a consistent approach or keep accurate records when people raise concerns with us, and the decision whether to progress that concern is determined by the inspector. It's particularly concerning as a main focus of our strategy is about listening and learning from people who raise concerns. So my first question, I'd be interested to learn how we are going to address that as a board. My second question is, I recently attended the CQC conference in Newcastle, and some of the staff there expressed concern about the assessor and inspector split, and I just wonder if we have any further clarity on that for reassurance.
Okay, thanks, Belinda. Do you want to, Tyson, do you want to kick off? I know colleagues may wish to.
Yes, thank you, Belinda. I mean, I'll address the inspector and assessor split part of the question. We've already launched our review of the roles. I think those colleagues who attended the conferences we ran around England will have seen that there is a clear role for assessment of a huge amount of data that we will receive going forward. And the point of the review, which was agreed at a recent ACAS discussion and then also came out very clearly in the LLR review, is that we will start look at exactly what the roles will look like going forward. So I've already written out to all the colleagues asking for 10 to 12 to become involved in the project. 82 have volunteered. So even though only 12 will be doing the real heavy lifting on this, I'll make sure that all 82 are also involved, and we're looking to start that now, and then that will go through to October, by which time we shall have a much clearer idea. But that's been initiated largely because of the comments that we've been receiving about colleagues' views on the roles.
Thanks, Belinda. So the question around consistency of our inspectors. So there is a wealth of work going on around whistleblowing led by one of our deputy directors, Hayley Moore, and there'll be outputs from that generated in the kind of coming weeks and months. I think it's also worth flagging that our new single assessment framework is the structured mechanism which will support inspectors when it comes to consistent decision making, capturing the actions we've taken and ensuring that things happen in a timely way.
Just to build on that, you're absolutely right about the importance of being able to not just hear, but to hold and then feed back to people who use services what action we've taken with regards to their work. So my colleague Jill Morell has been working really closely with colleagues in Mark's team to look at both how we physically capture the information we get from colleagues, store it well, and then can return the information to people who use services indicating what we've done. And that, for me, that's a really important trust circle that we're creating there. We've seen a massive rise, as you know, in give feedback on care and the feedback from people in service about how they're experiencing it. The absolute challenge for us is to make sure that we can be cogent about how we're using that information and what difference it's making. And I think a combination of the technology that we're putting in place and the methods by which the single assessment framework operates will give me the confidence that we can go back to people who use services in a timely way.
That's your question, Linda? Okay. Ian, you wanted to comment as well.
I think just to come in on the back of the point about consistency, one of the things that Tyson and his management team have done over the last few months as part of moving to the new teams is they've gone through all of our processes and all of our procedures with a consistency lens, and where there has been inconsistency, they've been designing that out, and that process continues as we've started to expose differences in a range of different processes, of which whistleblowing is one. I think we do need to recognise though that the professional judgment of inspectors is still important, and I think that's an important component of what we do.
Thanks. Stephen, I'll come to you in a second, but Tyson, you wanted to add?
Yeah, thank you. And final point for me on this, Belinda, we are picking up on what Kate said. We're also looking at the quality of how we respond to whistleblowing and safeguarding. For some time, we've been really good at the timeliness element, meeting the KPI, but now we're looking at a system for how we can actually measure the quality of our response to those, which I think taken in the round will improve what we're doing at the moment.
Okay, thanks, Tyson. Stephen.
Thank you. I guess firstly, thank you very much to the executive for the management response. Personally, I think it is a good, strong response, and we'll pick up some really, really important messages from the LLR report. One of the reflections from me as a non-exec, I suppose, is looking back and with all the advantage of hindsight, I don't think as a board we were close enough to the voice of staff. I think, therefore, my question is how, in terms of future board reporting, can we get a clearer line of sight, a more direct understanding of what staff are thinking and feeling, mood, morale, engagement, sense of inclusion, and how can we get a better understanding at board level of all of those issues around the staff experience of the transformation programme. The second point I just wanted to raise, working with Jane Chidger-Clark and with Mark on the National Guardian's Office, there are some specific recommendations in the report about improving our Freedom to Speak Up Guardian capability within CQC, because that is one way in which it's really important for staff to feel confident that when they've got concerns and they've got worries and they've got things they want to say, they've got a route to saying it, and they can trust in the route to raising their concerns, which is what the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians are trying to do. So just to note, working with Jane and with Mark, I think there's some really important work that we need to do, and we need to have some visibility of at board level about boosting our own internal capacity for freedom to speak up. Thanks.
Okay, do you might want to first go at that?
Thank you. Thanks, Stephen. So I think our pulse survey is a really good route for that regular check-in on where staff sentiment's at. And you may be aware we've currently got a survey opened at the moment focused on diversity and inclusion, and that closes in about a week's time. And already about 52% of our staff have completed it. So we have a mechanism from hearing from our colleagues, and also we have a really high response rate. So staff really engage with that as a route to telling us what they think, which is really valuable. I agree. I don't think we have adequately on a regular basis been giving board enough of a feel of what's going on for our colleagues outside of the pulse survey. So if I think about the regular transformation updates that we give you, I think there's more we can do to bring to life for you what's going on for our colleagues, and Chris can talk to you about that a bit more in a mo. I think in addition to that, I think there's a suite of kind of data about what we tell you about our people that, again, I think needs enhancing. And I could talk about that later on this afternoon about what might be in that pack as well, just in terms of general pressures on staff, turnovers, vacancy rates, etc. But Chris, do you want to say a bit more about staff sentiment?
Yes, I agree with your point, Stephen. You'll have noticed we've made some changes to the reporting pack for the transformation programme in particular. So there's more detail there about what we're hearing, both from colleagues internally and also from people who use services and stakeholders externally. I think there's more we can do to sort of give a sense of what some of the risks that sit behind those issues are, and also what we're doing about those, both practically in the programme, but also in terms of how we respond to colleagues. And I think this is a case sometimes of being really clear about what we can do, what we are doing, also being clear about why we're taking the action that we're taking. So hopefully you'll see in that report a combination of this is what we're hearing, these are the risks, and these are our actions. What I'll hopefully also give you is a little bit about what our approach is for the next set of messaging that's going to appear probably in a month's or 6 or 8 weeks' time, so we can have a good conversation and feel assured that the next set of information is built on the feedback we've received this time and also what we intend to do next.
Is that your question, Steve?
If I could come in on the freedom to speak up. So thank you, Stephen. I agree with the need for us to work on our freedom to speak up capability at CQC, and I'm the exec sponsor for Freedom to Speak Up. So I take that responsibility. At the operations conferences that we've had recently, I've appealed for help and support and engagement with colleagues to help share their experiences and what do they want to see improved, and I've been absolutely delighted with lots of offers of support to help us to work on that, and to help me understand what our colleagues want from the Freedom to Speak Up experience, and to share their experiences. I'm also very lucky that we're going to get some support from the National Guardian's Office in helping us assess our capabilities with some workshops that will help us understand a bit more about what best practice is and how we can improve. We obviously have our Guardian, Carolyn Jenkinson, who I'll be working with very closely. We've got a wealth of experience with Carolyn, and she understands a lot about what improvements we can make, and there's lots of opportunity there for us to. I don't want to prejudge that, so I want to listen and learn about what the opportunities are. But we know we need to boost our capacity and capability. We know we need to listen. We need to and we need to come up with a strategic plan of how we make the improvements that we need to make. Thank you.
I'll be very quick, Ian. As a result of the pulse surveys that Kate mentioned, we've had a number of pulse survey action groups within directorates and across CQC. And one of the areas that's been flagged when we've pulled all the information together is employee experience. And I am now, as of a few weeks ago, the exec sponsor for employee experience. So I've got a list of things that people have said, these are the things we want action on, and these are the things that we feel will make a difference within CQC. And I'll be working with our people team to look at the people plan, look at those actions, and then think about what kind of key things we can, key interventions we can do to help deliver on that difference that you've talked about.
Didn't see which hand went up first, but I'll go for Ali and then Mark.
Thank you. I'm pleased to see the acceptance and the commitment to undertaking all of the actions that were identified within the review. And I'm pleased to hear that there's a strong commitment to monitoring the sentiment of our colleagues and the external environment to understanding how these are bedded in. Between the two of those, aligning them, there's something around the attitudes, behaviours and culture that we developed that led us get to the position that led to the LLR review. I'd be keen to hear from exec colleagues what we're doing to ensure we get those aspects of change right.
Kate?
Thanks, Ali. So I've been learning a lot about culture recently, and I think for me, culture's about how we do things. There's a load of structural stuff, there's our policies, there's our frameworks within which we work, but also we role model on a day-to-day basis what we expect from others and the kind of tone we set in the organisation. And I think things like publishing this very transparent, very robust reflection of where we could and should have done better in lots of different areas. Hopefully not coming across as defensive at all in that, and where we've needed to, saying sorry where we've got things wrong. I hope that's the start of maybe a little shift in culture that we need to demonstrate, which is, as leaders, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to get things wrong. It's really important we're transparent about that, and we commit to do things differently and are prepared to be held to account for what those differences look like. So I hope the publishing of this report and the things that have followed since, such as colleagues receiving apologies, concrete things such as the commitment around the inspector-assessor split, commitment around how we're going to invest in our Speak Up. I hope those are concrete things, as well as maybe a little shift in how we work will go some way to build confidence and kind of set the tone we want to see through the organisation as well, which is, we all make mistakes, and it's important we acknowledge them and then commit to what we're going to do differently next time around.
Thanks, Kate. I saw various hands go up. Mark, I'll come to you, and then Blessing go up next, if that's okay. Mark.
Thank you. None of us was pleased to read the report. It was a sobering read, but I am pleased by the response, and I think it shows a real commitment to change what it feels like to work here, which is always my favourite definition of culture. And if we're wanting to create a truly open culture where people feel free to raise concerns, suggestions, questions, confident that they'll be listened to respectfully, confident that appropriate action will be taken, that's not an overnight exercise. And so the combination of a real commitment to address the 80 really constructive, helpful, very directional recommendations in here, but also to try to integrate it into a broader program of work that's not going to be delivered overnight. I think that's tremendously important. So that was an observation. The question, one of the things that obviously arose here is limited confidence around the organisation to talk about race, and maybe that reflects challenges in wider society. It's not something that we all feel tremendously confident about in our day lives, but there's lots that we can do to change that. And the truth is, if we're going to be able to have people call out issues when things just don't feel right, to address mistakes that people make before they turn into regular practices, to be allies and coaches for each other, we've got to get good at this. And we certainly cannot have questions of race in any way being a barrier to achieving the culture that we want, because people just, sometimes these are difficult conversations, and that's an extra dimension of difficulty that can't be a barrier. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about how we're addressing that.
I'll let Kate talk in a little bit more detail about that in a moment, but I think just there's a point that's worth, a contextual point that's worth making, which is when we look at our recruitment activity at the moment, a quarter of our new starters are now from a Black or Asian background, and we are and that number of people is outstripping the number of the percentage of people who are leaving. We have a relatively low turnover rate in the scheme of things. And if I look at the rate of employment across the whole organisation, we've got about just over 14% of our colleagues are from a Black or Asian background at all levels, and I think that move all the way through the management structure is really positive. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend job done, But I think having a genuinely, having a group of colleagues who are reflective of the population which they serve takes us some way towards what you've just described. And it also means that in terms of confidence in talking about race, we've got colleagues to work alongside us who are having those conversations to enable us to properly describe what's going on. Because I think ultimately, the work that we're doing around our new single assessment framework is all about re-emphasising, reinforcing the voice of people that use services and making sure that those voices are reflected in our reporting activity. That's what the single assessment framework redoubles on. If we've got people on staff who can make those connections with people in services, that's going to make a huge difference. I think Kate wanted to come in as well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So it was interesting. So the conversation that goes along the lines of we find it really, we're not confident and competent about talking about race or racism. Neither are most people in the country. We heard a really strong feedback from our colleagues, people in our organisation, who say we're often members of professional, we're registered professionals. We should be holding ourselves to a higher bar. We should feel confident in this area. So there was a real pushback from our people saying none of us are sitting on our laurels saying, well, everyone in society finds this hard, we find it hard too. Our people were saying we absolutely should feel confident in this area. What was really interesting attending Tyson's operational conferences was I had many conversations, as did colleagues, with people who go out and inspect who said, I recognise that finding. I often see things that feels like there are issues going on around race or racism, but I don't feel like I've got the tools to name it, to describe it, to require action on the back of it. So our colleagues want to do better, feel like they should be doing, that we should all be doing a lot better in this area, but also recognise that is reflected in their experiences, that for a number of our people, there is that lack of confidence and competence. So this is an area, a perfect example where, on Ian's point, we don't want to rush at it. So we've started to do some thinking about this. We're going to work with our Race Equality Network to look at what we want to do. It's easy to think, let's leap to training, but actually I know, as we've talked about this as an exec team, our ambition is to go further than it is in the report. So this is not just about, in 6 months' time, us asking everyone in the organisation, do you feel more confident and competent about talking about race and racism? I think there is an ambition around, we want to understand structural racism. We want to be able to call it out. We want to go further than is in the report. And in order to do that in a really meaningful way, I think this is one of those actions where we will want to just take a bit more time to make sure the things we're going to put in place are the things we think will make a difference.
And there are plenty of other organisations that have been through this. There are some very good practices out there which I'd be happy to try and connect with if that would be useful.
Thanks, Mark. Blessing, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Ian. I welcome the LLR review and its findings. The Equality Network co-chairs and I look forward to working closely with the LLR sponsor to move things forward and help the board and ET to make the necessary changes and improvements, always ensuring the colleagues' voice is continuously listened to, thus providing a better culture within CQC for all colleagues. I am also looking forward to help in shaping the work on race findings and our confidence in discussing race to achieve race fluency at CQC. Thank you.
That's very helpful, Blessing. Thank you. Jora.
Thanks, Ian. So there seems to be a sort of breakdown in communication between management and colleagues. How do we ensure that we can get colleagues to feel they're heard more often and actions are taken quickly rather than allowing them to fester and then something that seems quite small suddenly becomes quite large and our colleagues feel stressed and under pressure? Are there any ways that we can close the communication gap between management and our sort of staff colleagues?
I think it's a really fair point, Jura. Two things I'd say. One is one's about trust, one's about speed. So just to build on the trust point, I talked about it earlier in response to Stephen's question. Being open and transparent about what we're hearing, what risks that poses and what we're doing about it is really, really important. And I think we've got better at interpreting that information and presenting it here as well as in other places. And that's something I want to continue to do. I think the other challenge is one of speed, about how quickly we can help frontline operational colleagues, deputy directors, etc., and across the business feel able to give us that information quickly so that we can course correct on operational decisions or things that we want to do in the programme. So I think I think we've begun to, as Ian was saying, it doesn't happen overnight, but I think we've begun through some of the actions we've taken recently to build back some trust with colleagues that will enable us to people to feel confident about sharing that information again. I think the other part of this is giving operational managers both the permission and the requirement to give us that information quickly so we can take the right course correction. Just to get, as a practical example, it's a very small one, but there's a real challenge at the moment around preparing people for the new single assessment framework and the training that goes with that. And we had some conversations about, which came from the ops conferences, and we all met colleagues afterwards talking about they supported the idea of the new framework, were concerned about whether they would both, not just in terms of the technical ability to use the new system, but the cultural steps that would create. And so there was a real concern that they would feel ill prepared for that shift in October. So Joyce chairs the regulatory governance group, and we had a really good conversation. Perhaps Joyce can talk more about it, but a really good conversation about trying to set some different priorities operationally so that we can make sure we've responded to the concerns around training and provide the right time resource so that people feel confident to go through that training in the right way so that they feel equipped for that change. It's a small example of it, but I think that ability to not just hear but respond in a timely way to concerns that we're hearing, I think will build a sort of virtuous circle of trust and hopefully speed that loop back to us and to yourselves.
Thanks, Chris. Tyson.
Thank you. The only point I was going to add is that I found leading a big change programme remotely on Teams or such other such tools really difficult to do because you can't see people's expressions, you can't read their body language. The 4 conferences we've held, and I know we've talked about a lot about those already, but I kind of knew that, but that was revelatory to me because I was actually there talking to people. I could see how they were reacting, and we designed the afternoons deliberately so there was time for colleagues to have their say, and that was a risk because colleagues might not have done, but a large number of them did, and I get a sense that that's the way we've got to work going forward. Of course, we're all over England, so we have to continue to work remotely, but I think we need to come together either as a whole group or in directorates or in smaller teams, but I think that was a way in which you communicate. It's much more impactful than doing it all online.
I'm glad you said that, Tyson. I mean, to some extent saves me ask the question I was going to ask, but many of us have exposure to other organisations, and I think others I see have moved more quickly away from wholly virtual working to getting people together than perhaps we've done. Now, we are more virtual than many other organisations, so we're clearly not in a position saying, everyone's got to be in the office 3 days a week or something the way others have, but nevertheless, I think particularly those of us that went to your operations conferences just found how valuable it was. I've been here a year as the chair. I met more people in those 2 days. I could only make 2, unfortunately, but I met more people in those 2 days than I did in the previous year, which was a huge benefit. Joy, so you want to say something?
Yes, because Chris mentioned the Regulatory Governance Board, I thought I'd mention it really quickly. We had our first meeting, so this is part of transformation, and it was launched in April. And we had our first meeting on Monday, and the members are from across the organisation, including operations and other areas like policy and strategy, engagement, data and insight. And that meeting focused on, what do we want what are the must-dos for our operational colleagues so that they're not being asked to deliver so much so that they can't actually focus on the things that are really essential over the next couple of quarters, which is the training to prepare people for the single assessment framework and also the work to validate the single assessment framework so that we can use it. So the board, which focuses on our regulatory priorities and how we use the single assessment framework, identified a group of activities so that people aren't overhauled, don't have a tremendous workload, and the priorities were set with training being up there. We've got to continue to respond to demand like safeguarding and whistleblowing, but alongside that is training and the single assessment framework, and then some other areas of work. So we're trying to pull away things that are necessary to do but may not be as urgent. And we want to give Tyson the opportunity to say to his ops colleagues and to the networks and to the colleagues that work within operations that this training is really important. We know it's important for you. You know you want it because we want to get on and use the single assessment framework, and that's what the board did on Monday to give that opportunity to make sure that we can deliver that work.
Thanks so much, Joyce. Are there any other comments or questions? Sean?
Thanks. I'd just like to add a couple of very brief points. We've talked about the importance of culture and how we would signal a change in culture by seeing a shift in how we work, I think was a great way of putting it. I'm aware of a couple of examples of where we have the opportunity to do this very soon. Firstly, with primary medical services, we've heard voices that have said that the share of the agenda sometimes for that group is difficult to get hold of, and they sometimes feel a bit overcrowded by other sectors, and I think we want to respond to that, and we can respond to that in real time. The other example, I think, is the maternity inspection programme, where we've heard clearly from colleagues the importance of ensuring that that inspection programme looks very closely at inequalities and the issues around inequalities, and that our staff have the confidence to discuss those issues, and that is something that we want to respond to and are responding to currently.
Thanks, Sean. So I sort of pull it together. Any other comments people want to make? I mean, if not, I'm trying to summarise that. It's an impossible task, but I jotted down a few things I thought I heard, and my colleagues, I'm sure, will correct me if you don't think this is right. So there's a very comprehensive response on LLR. We haven't really thanked Kate for producing it, but Kate pulled it all together. And we said at a high level in the first session, broadly agreed with it. I think if you look at that schedule, it says agreed. We may need to discuss further the mechanics of some of the hows, but all the points are agreed. So that was the management position. I think I heard from my board colleagues that they were agreed with, and pleased to see that. Several people have used the word commitment. I would say, given that I've spoken to many of the executives over the course of the last few weeks, both those in the room and others, I would say to my board colleagues here who are listening, I think that commitment is genuine. I think there's a real desire to make sure we get this right. And I think that commitment leads into an ambition to actually do better, which again a couple of people have said, and I'd like to come back to in just a moment. This is, in terms of timing, the chart may not show it. There's a few things shown as being completed, like a new policy on whistleblowing, but quite a lot of the work is underway already. And we did say before, and I think we're doing now, baking it into the kind of business as usual. So this isn't a separate project out there. Perhaps that was an issue for the transformation originally. It was kind of separate, but this is embedded in the way we're going to do things. So there will be some relatively quick wins, but some of this stuff will take a longer while. Indeed, I think rather than saying 6 to 18 months, I think some of this stuff is just going to be ongoing. Our staff will change, society will change. So I think this isn't so much around completing a project. It's a new way of working, of listening to people and responding in a changing environment. I think an excellent point was made about, just to be clear, the recommendations don't relate just to the people around the table. I mean, it is for the organisation as a whole. So for everybody, 3,000 plus employees. But let's be clear, it's the responsibility of the people around this table to provide the leadership to enable that to happen, to make sure it does happen. As a detail point, we need some better ways of measuring some stuff so that we have a better sight of what's going on. A lot of the better listening is a cultural issue, but we also need some better measurements. There are things that we don't know. One of the people I met at one of the conferences raised with me the issue of whether we had sufficient line of sight here. I think it was your phrase, Stephen, but we had line of sight on staff vacancies, for example. And I think the truth is we didn't. Tyson and I have talked, so we're going to have, I mean, there's a specific issue now that we may come to later, but we will ensure that at this table we have a better line of sight on vacancies. There is, I think, a really important point I tried to make at the last meeting, but some of the more difficult issues here are not of our making, they're societal issues. But that doesn't mean to say we can't address them. Quite the opposite. I think as a fundamentally important body in the health and care systems of this country, we're in a unique position to try to bring about improvements elsewhere. But we can't bring about improvements elsewhere if we're not better ourselves. So, you know, I think there's work to be done there. And that's an example of what I meant about this being ongoing. You know, in a year or so's time, 20% of our staff will be new. So we need to find ways of recruiting the right people, inducting people, and the issues about, for example, talking about race, I think just an ongoing challenge for all of us. We talked about some difference in ways of working. I think fundamental to that is listening and responding, which were no coincidence, two keywords out of the name of the review. And, you know, I detect among my colleagues nobody was happy 2 months ago. Nobody was going around with a smile on their face. I'm not sure people necessarily got a smile on their face now, but there's, I think, a mood change from one of being deeply concerned to almost a degree of optimism. Now we come to look at it and seeing this as an opportunity for CQC to do much better and play a fundamentally important part in the health and care system. So nobody likes what we've got in front of us. But I think, picking up a phrase you used previously, you know, this is a platform to do better. So there's an opportunity. I think the role of this board is to make sure we seize that opportunity. So we are being asked as a board to approve a document. I haven't heard any objections. What I have heard is violent agreement. We need to understand this isn't the NED is holding the executive to account for something. There's an element of that, but we are a unitary board, collective responsibility. So as the board approves this, it is a board responsibility to make sure it happens, and the NEDs will have to play their part in that. So, but I also heard that they say this is a platform part of a bigger picture. So we're not signing off LLR plus in a formal sense, but actually what we're agreeing to is LLR plus. So can I, happy to approve the plan on that basis. Okay, well that's excellent. And could I thank the management, the point I skipped, but I have been very impressed with the way the management have taken this on the chin. I mean, I've seen no defensiveness, and I know it's been difficult for some. So I'd like to thank all my colleagues there. Just as a final note, could I just once again thank some of the people that contributed to all of this. I mean, we did say that the other day, but perhaps in a slightly different mood. But obviously, Zoe Leventhal and Scott Durarage led the two work streams. Ali, looking in the wrong place, sorry. Ali, thank you very much on behalf of this board for contributing to that and overseeing it. And then Jade Wright, Jay Warmington, or Peter Dutt and Robin Straw played their part. The majority of those were with us the other day. So once again, record our collective thanks on their behalf. Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. Probably difficult to move on from that, but move on we will. And Ian, I think it's over to you. We've got about 15 minutes for a reporting update of various things. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. So as usual, we've split the executive report into two halves. One is around regulatory insight and one is around operations. If I scamper through both of them at the same time, I'll assume you've read the detail. Firstly, local authority assurance. We've talked about that many times around this table. I think we're making good progress. We've recruited the team, and 3 out of 4 pilot sites have been identified, and we're continuing to look for the remaining pilot site. But we're confident we can continue. In terms of dementia is a topic that we spend a lot of time on as an organisation, and a lot of our providers support people with dementia. We're reviewing our approach to dementia, and we will be developing a new dementia strategy. So we'll be working with stakeholders and people internally to do that. National maternity programme, as we've been talking about, we have a programme of inspections, inspecting the maternity services across the country. Insights are being shared as we go with individual providers. And there have been some delays to the programme, it would be fair to say, because of trying to accommodate strike action in providers. What we've tried to do, as always, is to remain risk-focused, but also to recognise that there are some very practical operational challenges that providers have been facing because of strikes recently. So we're continuing to also work towards an October date for bringing the National Maternity Investigation Team, they're the team that currently sit within HSIB, into CQC. We're looking forward to welcoming about 180 colleagues into CQC. And I'm hopeful that we can consider how the investigation team work alongside our current inspection teams to maximise the insights that we get to make the most difference for women and their families as part of maternity services. So I think there's some real synergies, and I think it's a real opportunity for us to make a difference there. In terms of urgent and emergency care, we have recommenced scheduled urgent and emergency care inspections, focused as ever on risk. And we continue to look for ways to share the insights from those inspections. And we're continuing this process of developing materials alongside frontline practitioners. So it's material that's developed by frontline practitioners with our inspectors to be used by frontline inspectors. I think it's a good example of a very practical way we're contributing to improvement in what is ultimately a very busy context. In terms of ICSs, our methodology has now been signed off by Department of Health and Social Care, and pilot activity is beginning with a big focus on equity of access, which I'm sure the public will be pleased about. In terms of operational matters, a couple of quick things. I think good performance since the start of April, despite the strike action that's occurring in providers, and also the work we've been doing internally with moving teams into moving colleagues into new teams that Tyson was alluding to earlier. It's also worth making, just the one thing I did want to pull out from this, it's worth making the point that the focus on risk-based inspections has meant that we're more likely to find breaches of regulation, which is in some respects an obvious point. But over a third of our current inspections are revealing breaches of regulations. And each breach of regulation brings with it a package of work as inspectors unpack it and decide what to do next, and the follow-up work that's necessary. And from a productivity point of view, that's quite challenging. So I think it's all the more testament to inspection colleagues who've managed to continue to do that in what remains a very challenging environment externally. And then finally, before I hand back to you, Ian, just on engagement, just to flag that we've got a couple of upcoming surveys, one on urgent and emergency care and one on controlled drugs management, which will be advertised on our website in the next few weeks. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, thanks. So, well, there's quite a lot in there, but it's relatively straightforward. Any questions, my colleagues, for Ian or members of his team? Just not so much on the paper itself, but just one thought as to, I know we only just started warm weather, so difficult to forget last winter, but I'd be interested in where we are in terms of thinking about and working with others of planning for next year. In particular, I suppose the context of the question is we made some changes this year to what we did on a few occasions because of the pressures the system was under. Can we, to what extent are we thinking ahead to next winter at the moment?
Well, I think it's fair to say we haven't really stopped working with other agencies like NHSE on reviewing the response to this winter, reviewing what worked well, and we'll be working alongside them, developing another plan for this winter, I imagine before too long. There's no real hiatus between the planning and the implementation of the planning.
So Chris and Kate, I think, in that order, probably.
As the board will know, one of the areas of our focus for our operational colleagues from January through to March was going out and re-rating adult social care settings. And we know where adult social care settings have a rating that requires improvement or below, many local authorities won't buy new services from them. So thanks to the effort of Tyson and his colleagues, we started off with an ambition to do about 300. I think we ended up achieving over 500 600 inspections during that time, and we've also got a notional figure about the number of beds we believe that activity opened up into the system. And noting Joyce's earlier point, regulatory governance has just agreed priorities, which is around responding to risk and getting training done. I think as we get into autumn time, there maybe will be an opportunity for a conversation about where there might be scope for such an approach again, but we need to ensure that we can manage it in the round with risk being the priority. And then just the second brief thing to mention is we've just started a conversation about the role intermediate care can play in preventing people from going into hospital if they don't need to, but also supporting timely discharge. And I've just been posing questions to the team about, do we know what really good quality intermediate care looks like? Do we know where it's provided across the country? Is there an inequality angle to this where you might be more likely to access intermediate care and get better outcomes if you live in certain parts of the country than others? So it's a piece of work we're just initiating now that I think broadly will be using the inspection activity that's already happening plus other intelligence and insight we have around people's experiences through that pathway. But hopefully we'll have something to offer of use around autumn time on that as well.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Kate. Chris, you wanted to add something?
Just to build on that point, actually. Colleagues may remember we published a document called People First, which was a bringing together of frontline experience of health and care services, particularly urgent and emergency care, colleagues who work in primary care and social care, to look at what practically people could do. So it's trying to bring the best practice from the best organisations. That rolled out towards the end of last year. What we've been doing, what the team have been doing since that time, is looking at how it's been adopted and what the challenges to its adoption in different organisations and different ICS areas. I think what we'll have with we're doing some work with NHS providers and also with Care England and others, looking at some of the challenges of now that will present themselves for next winter. And I think what our aim is, before state of care, there's certainly in state of care, is to be really clear about, first of all, what we've seen that's worked well, where have people taken risks, and where has that innovation led to real change in the way that people receive services, and also what potentially are the current blockers that may not be the blockers that they were a year ago, from both a sort of an NHS and an adult social care perspective, and what can we say about that, and how can we support those to be removed as we write this year's state of care. So hopefully we go into this year's state of care with a really good understanding of how people first landed, what's worked and what hasn't, and what we might need to do to augment that for this autumn and winter.
Sorry, Joyce, we put your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, over winter, we might start to see, or well, winter to come, we might start to see the impacts of the single assessment framework, because we made a decision last winter that we, become risk-based, and so we would do less activity because of the pressure the system was under. And there were lots of people speaking to us at the time saying, just when we need you, you might not be there. So the public wanted us to be there to say, look what it's like out here. And also the staff working in services wanted us to be there to say, we want a voice, we want to be able to tell you the activity that what's going on. The single assessment framework allows us to get evidence from lots of different sources. Inspection is not the only tool that we will use. Still critical and important tool for us to use, but we will be able to get data flows are much faster, outcomes from things from our partners. So we're going to be pulling in evidence and information from lots of different areas, and it isn't the inspection that gives us the reliance on what's happening, and we can make more insightful decisions about where we go and when and how we use being on site and how we get people's experiences. So there's a different approach that we can use next winter that we just really want to explore.
That's a very helpful comment, Joyce. Maybe it's perhaps worth having a more detailed discussion on that sometime in the autumn before we hit winter. Okay, didn't look at any other questions. Thank very much, Ian. It was helped by the fact it's a very clear report. So, corporate performance report for Q2. I think we're going to be joined by Stephanie Tarrant, one of your team. Sorry?
That's for the business planning.
Oh, it's the business plans. Okay, beg your pardon. So corporate performance report. Anyway, Kate and Chris, over to you.
Just a short opening from me. So this is our end of year performance report. So activity within operations, our people, and where we are with the finances. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, as so we've got the end of year performance report. We've also got a couple of page year at a glance as well, just that we do kind of at the end of the year position, just to pull out some of the stats and things you can see that we've delivered in year. I'll just pull out a couple of areas just to talk to, and then I can open out for any comments and questions. So in terms of regulatory contact, we've nearly 28% of locations have either been inspected or had a DMA call in the year, with just under 10,000 inspections delivered. When you factor in the public statements that we do as well alongside that, that means about 58% of providers have had regulatory contact in year. In terms of appropriate care, you can probably see a slide in the deck, I think it's slide 3. On average, 86% of registered services have a rating of good or outstanding. What you can see this year is our focus on risk and the impact that's had since the start of the year, with about 64% are rated as good or outstanding. So you can see that trend and how that's changed in year. In terms of registration, on the face of it, we are below our targets. We set ourselves a target of 15% reduction across all of the categories. We have 3 categories of registration type, and we set ourselves a 15% reduction. In some areas we haven't hit that 15%, but there's been good solid reductions across the board. So normal applications, we've seen a 2% reduction, complex applications 11.5% reduction, and simple applications 27% reduction. So variability there, but a kind of a solid performance across registration as well. Just before I move on to some of the people and the money, just one point of clarity in the deck. In terms of representations, there's a slide in the deck that talks about as the kind of trend of reps received. Just to point out, the graph is right, but the narrative below saying that there was a decrease, an increase in January and decrease, that's the wrong way around. So the graph is right, that the narrative supporting that is the wrong way around, just for point of clarity. In terms of RAG status, on the first dashboard, you'll see some areas that pull out. It'd be remiss of me not to mention the people plan, the kind of rated RAG, red RAG rated. So we've talked pulse survey previously at board. That does mean that a large proportion of the findings of that mean that 4 of our measures are red. We've kind of touched on this before in the previous item around LLR. Work is progressing throughout the organisation on a corresponding action plan, as well as focusing on culture. We'll cover both of those more in the next agenda item. And Ian touched on this in Trenholm as well before, but we continue to monitor diversity of the workforce. Data shows that we're making progress against our objectives, but we need to continue to do more and drive that agenda forward. Last bit from me, just in terms of our finances, the revenue side ended the year with a 5 million surplus, which is about 2.1% of budget. On the capital side, we're overspent by 4.1 million in year, which we had tracked throughout the year. That's the most we've ever spent on capital in CQC's history. That's largely because of the ambitious plans we set at the start of the year around capital that we aim to minimise during the year. However, what we've managed to deliver in terms of outturn represents delivering on those ambitious plans without any slippage that we've seen in previous years. So I'll pause there and happy to take any comments or questions.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I mean, the report's become progressively more comprehensive over the time that I've been here, so thank you for that. Any questions for Belinda?
Hi, it's not really a question for Chris, I think it's more a question for Tyson, but it's the year in view slide, and we talk about the out-of-hours inspections. And I know this morning we've had a conversation with the private board about out-of-hours inspections, how important they are, but I think we should mention it in the public board about the work that we are doing regarding increasing the number of out-of-hours inspections. So more of a question for Tyson than Chris, but
Explain.
Thank you, Belinda. And yes, I mean the number of out-of-hours inspections we do at the moment, which aren't just an hour either side of the main working day, it isn't enough. we have set up a project which we are now working with the trade unions on, and will take us through to October, so that we do it properly, is so that we are able to look at the remuneration and the shift allowances that our colleagues will have if they are working in the middle of the night, for example, but also making sure that we've got management support on call and properly set up, and also that we're really thinking about the safety of our colleagues who might be working in difficult establishments at sort of antisocial times of the day and night. But we're absolutely aligned that we want to do more of this. This is absolutely the direction of travel, but we want to do it properly. So a few more months just to get the project right, and then hopefully I can update the board on the findings.
Thanks very much.
I just thought it was worth mentioning the public board seems to have had such a discussion about it this morning.
Yeah, thanks very much for mentioning it, Belinda. I mean, it's an important point. Also, I'll just say that it came up largely through the investigations that we did at the subcommittee of this board, the RCG, where we're looking at the practicalities of a number of things that we did. So I think there could be other examples, but thank you for raising that one. It's very important. Any other questions for Chris?
I think Tyson wants to talk about his vacancies.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask him later on. I was trying to... another of my questions. I wondered if anyone else had any first.
No, I'd be happy to. Maybe, I mean, do you want to set the scene, Kate, in terms of vacancies more generally? Then I'll do a bit of a deep dive into one area of my business. I know you've had some correspondence on, Ian, and it might be helpful if I set out where we are there.
Okay, firstly, I referenced it earlier, we want to start producing a kind of people pack that comes to board probably every quarter. We want to have our first go at it for this July's board, and I would probably really value kicking around what we're proposing to put in it with a couple of you, but it's probably going to look like the kind of life cycle of vacancy rates, new joiners, induction plans, etc., through to kind of exit interviews, etc. So it is something we need to report on better and give you better visibility of. On the vacancy rates, so our average vacancy rates across CQC is around 9.9%. In operations, it's slightly higher at the moment, so it's about 11.5%. Slightly higher than across the organisation, but not massively out. And in terms of numbers, that equates to about 247 full-time equivalents, and then noting on top of that, those are the rest of the organisation, and you've got the additional things such as sickness, maternity, etc. But over to you, Tyson.
So thanks, Kate. And I thought I'd talk a bit about the vacancies for inspectors, our B-grade colleagues in the networks, because I know, Ian, you've had some correspondence on that topic. And just to reiterate what Kate has said, I realise it's a challenging time for colleagues at the moment, and the figures I'm talking about won't include people who maybe aren't on full duty, are on maternity leave or on sickness, but these are the vacancies according to the figures. Our current establishment of inspectors in the networks is 868, and I would like to have gone into the financial year higher than that on 912, which is a gap of 4.8%. Our plan during the course of this year, because we're still currently using the old methodology, even though we're in our new teams in the networks, is to go higher than we were planning and to come at 1,001 inspectors, and then to glide down to the 912, which is our settled establishment by the end of the financial year. And the gap between where we are at the moment and where we want to get to in terms of 1,001 is 13.2%. So the gap is 4.8%, but actually the real gap is around 13%, which I think is on a par with what Kate was saying more generally. But we have already recruited some other people to work in our integrated teams, including 23 regulatory officers, 13 inspection planning coordinators, and we've recruited our first 52 regulatory coordinators, a new role. There'll be one in each integrated team. 52 of them have been recruited. They've not started yet, and their induction starts next week.
Okay, and Stephen had a question, but just finish off on that. Are our recruitment finalisation, the transaction element of our HR teams and onboarding, slick enough to bring in the people we need. Is that okay now?
So the recruitment activity that's been happening in Ops has been significant, and it's been significant for HR colleagues, but it's also been really significant for Tyson's people who have been sitting on recruitment panels for a chunk of time. We need to have a look at what we do in these sorts of circumstances where we know that there is a large amount of recruitment activity that needs to happen. So there's that, how do we do the volume bit? But you'll also know, following the listening, learning, and responding to concerns review, we are really interested in looking at how we might recruit in a way that's different. So how do we recruit well, make it a positive experience for people who are neurodiverse? How do we make sure reasonable adjustments is a really fantastic offer, etc. So there's a piece of work that you already know about how we can do reasonable adjustments better, but we're going to fold that into actually, is there a different way we want to go about recruitment when we've got large numbers of recruitment, a large amount of recruitment activity to undertake, as is the situation at the moment.
Okay, thanks. As flagged earlier, we'll have greater visibility in the future. Stephen, I think you were next, and Blessing, you wanted to. Can I go to Stephen first and then come to you?
Thanks, Ian. I wanted to raise a different issue, if I could, which is page 43, and the trend in people giving us feedback on their care, because in one sense, this is really, really good news. More and more people are wanting to give us feedback on their care, and that's a hugely important data source. I suppose the question for me, looking at that trend rate, if we've got 10,000 plus, bits of feedback every month and rising, kind of what are the consequences for us? There's a set of consequences, I think, for Mark and Helen and team. How you convert that then into reliable, valid, robust evidence about risk assessments by provider, because this is one form of evidence, I think. And then there's the loop back to the LLR report, because the people giving us that feedback, many of them won't want to feel, well, I just put it into a black hole and I got nothing back again. And there's a resource consequence for us, therefore, in how we respond so that people feel their feedback has been heard and listened, and they understand what we're going to do with it. So it's really good news, but it has some resource consequence for us, I think, and I'd be interested to know, have we scoped that, and do we understand what that consequence is?
I have two volunteers, Mark and Chris.
I'll go first if I can. On the technology side and on the data and insight side, this is a great news story. I mean, we've made a number of improvements to the Give Feedback on Care service to make it easier for people to contact us. So that's part of that good news story. We've got a number of improvements that we're bringing in through the regulatory platform, which will enable us to manage and handle the information that comes in to make it more efficient and easier for people to be able to manage that. One of the things that we're doing, which will be a summer provision of regulatory platform for colleagues, will involve bringing in all information that we gather, whether it's from Give Feedback on Care, whether it's contacts directly into our contact centre, or whether it's through other mechanisms that we receive information, all into one place for our inspectors and assessors, so that it makes it significantly easier for them to see everything in one place. So I think we're going to generate a number of efficiencies which will enable us to help us process this this body of work better. And in the future, we will be developing this service further, such that we can engender a more of a two-way conversation, so that we'll be able to not only receive information from people, but also to have a digital mechanism via which we can communicate back to people as well and let them know what we do with the information that they give us.
So that will all be done from your team, Mark, in terms of sort of both the crunching of the analysis to understand what this is telling us, but also the feedback to the individual who's given us that concern. All comes from your team.
The operational mechanisms is a combination of our NCSE colleagues and our operational colleagues.
Chris, you want to
Just to build on that. So first of all, I know you said this, but this is a fantastic result, and a result of partnerships, including colleagues in the room from Healthwatch and elsewhere. The fact that people trust us with more and more of their information about how they're receiving services is really important. One of the things that's changed probably over the last 3 to 4 years is how, go back to my point about speed, we're able now to use this information alongside other information to take action on behalf of people who use services in the inspections. I can think of inspections we're doing today that we may not have done in the same way 3 or 4 years ago because of A, the volume of information that's come in, and B, the way in which it's coming alongside other information. So I think it's a really important point. I think there's a cultural point here as well about how we have traditionally viewed information from people who use services as opposed to other forms of data. And I think the thing that one of the marvellous things about what Mark's team will do is they'll be able to pull together a more complete picture of how an organisation or an area are performing, and it will help colleagues in their judgment of risk in an area. So rather than seeing disparate individual emails or notifications that come to their inbox and they have to make a judgment based upon disparate information, they'll see it all in the same place all at once. And I do think that will really help us both provide a better response, a more consistent response, but a faster and more meaningful response for people that use services. So I hear what you say about I think this is a tremendous response that we've generated with colleagues from Healthwatch and the other partners on Tell Us About Your Care and give feedback on care. But I do think it's the start of, or it's the progression of, a cultural journey about valuing the voice of people alongside data information and pushing them together in one place that the system that Mark described does.
Thanks, Chris. Blessing, you wanted to ask a question?
Thank you. On the recruitment piece, we do need more independent panel members, IPMs, so approximately 820 to cover all grades, to ensure the recruitment process is bias-free and considers as well as covers all aspects of protected characteristics for all colleagues at interviews. So having more IPMs would actually help with that process.
Probably more a statement than a question, Kate, unless there's anything you want to add.
It's on my to-do list. I will check where we are with because we've all experienced interviewing with independent panel members on the panel, and they add so much value. So we're really committed to it as an organisation. But it sounds like I need to ask the question: are we continuing to recruit so that we've got good numbers and the right mix of independent panel members?
All right, thank you.
Tyson, do you want to do it?
I'll rather cheekily make a point about IPM, so if I may also make a point about give feedback on care. Looking at some of the reasons why we are managing to recruit a quarter of people from ethnic minority backgrounds, one of the reasons I've been given by Kate's colleagues is the fact that we are using IPM, so absolutely right on that. If I can go back to the give feedback on care, I think also one of the reasons why we've created the assessor role is so that we will have someone whose role it is to absorb all of this data, all of this intelligence and all of this input, rather than sort of relying on the person who's currently doing the inspector role to do all of that as well. So I repeat what everyone else has said about this is great news, but I think part of our structural changes will help us here as well.
Okay, thanks, Tyson. If there are no more comments, Chris, thank you very much indeed for that. More welcome, Steph, at the right time. One more session before we break. We've got an update on the transformation people. So Amy Pritchard, who's been leading this work, I guess, will join us, I'm expecting. I said we're expecting you, Amy, so I'm glad you're there. Welcome. Brief update on the transformation. Kate and or Mark, I think you were going to introduce this. Usual rules. Amy read the paper, but you might like to have the high points, and then let's take questions.
Lovely, thank you. So this is a review of what we've achieved over the last quarter. A couple of things before we get into it. So Amy is leaving us for a new adventure, which we're sad about. So a massive thank you to Amy for her work. Amy will be working with a colleague called Kerry Dearden, who's joining the organisation to take over the role of Director of Transformation. And Mark Sutton and I will be leaning more into the Senior Responsible Officer. Is that the O? Yeah, the SRO role for two of the programmes. So Chris will remain the SRO for the finance system. Mark's going to be stepping in as SRO for Reg Transformation and I for corporate services. Very briefly before I hand over to Amy, on the corporate services review, as with all aspects of our business, you'll notice a theme as we go through this afternoon's session. We took the listening, learning and responding to concerns review as an opportunity to challenge ourselves about the approach we were planning for corporate services review, to check that it was in the spirit of what LLR recommendations were telling us. And actually, we, on the back of that, decided we wanted to spend more time engaging with the people who will be going through the corporate services review. I've established something called a change advisory group, who are a group of 15 colleagues across the directorates who are going to be affected by this. So across corporate services, engagement, policy, strategy, and technology. And they are a group of frontline colleagues who will be helping me and the team steer the ship on how this work goes. And one of the messages that came out from that group is, let's not just do a people change as we make these changes. Let's also look at opportunities around how we can change our ways of working to make them as effective as possible. So if you're happy, Mark, if I hand over to Amy now, and then I think she'll bring you in. So over to you, Amy.
Yeah, there you go. So we've made some good achievements across the last quarter. So starting with regulatory transformation programme, we have already begun implementing our new regulatory services. I think Joyce may have updated on one of those earlier, being regulatory governance. Those services are foundational to the other services that will start to come through in July and October. We're also on track to go live with the first of our digital elements in that programme, which is registration and cancellation, and that will come live towards the end of this month. As I said a moment ago, we are also fully locked down now in terms of all of the regulatory services that will roll out across July and October. And that's really key, because what it will allow is all of our operational colleagues to undertake the final transition to the new ways of working, really fully embrace the new single assessment framework. And that will enable them to undertake their roles more efficiently and deliver a much greater user experience for colleagues as well as providers. The other headline that I would just emphasise before handing over to Mark is that we are about to close our regulatory services operations programme. That programme obviously has been responsible for designing the new operational structures required to support our single assessment framework, and has also been responsible for transitioning colleagues into those new structures. We are continuing with the culture work to support that transition, and we accept there's absolutely a lot more to do, which we will continue to do in that space, along with evaluating how those roles work in practice once we put the new regulatory services live. And of course, as Kate mentioned earlier, we're also doing a lot of work across the programmes to respond to the LLR review and to make sure that those recommendations are embedded in everything that we do. So, Mark, I will bring you in perhaps to talk about TDI and some of the deliveries over the quarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Just to give a little bit more flavour around some of the data and insight and the technology components. Firstly, data and insight, as you'll be aware, there's been a really significant transformation programme, which we've now just concluded. And a significant part of that has been the launch of our new enterprise data platform. That's really significant for us. It means that all of our analytics products, that all of our regulatory colleagues use are now created by our new centralised Azure or Power BI based data and analytics system. All of our new operational and strategic insight will be created on that platform. It gives our data and insight colleagues the tools that they need to do their job with a fast, efficient, centralised, high-quality data tool set. And we've even started to begin to decommission some of the legacy infrastructure that we had. We've also spent a lot of time with our colleagues, making sure that they've got the training that they need. So we've had a Power BI boot camp that's run across the entire of our data and insight unit. That's been really extremely well received by our colleagues. And that's not the end of the story. Of course, we're now into our onward development of data and insight capabilities to build and support the single assessment framework and our new way of working. In regulatory transformation on the technology side, that work is progressing extremely well. Amy mentioned launching next week is our registration cancellation service. So that's a really big deal. It's an end-to-end service. So this is the ability for our providers to be able to cancel a service in advance, something not possible at the moment, and to be able to cancel registered manager associations. So that joins business development, process change, underpinned by technology support. It allows us to create efficiency improvements for us and for our providers as well. It's a simpler process. It frees up our colleagues to work on other activity, which is something you'll see repeated as we continue to roll out further of our changes. And then our next big go live is on track for our summer release, currently being tested with colleagues. Jory, you mentioned earlier on about how do we make sure that we're listening to our colleagues and we bring them into the work. And I think part of the work we're doing here is hopefully starting to help that process. We've got subject matter experts from across the business. We've got colleagues who will be using and working with new systems and new ways of working, who are part of the team that are designing and building the systems, and we're getting feedback from them as we go through that, and we're iterating as we go through. So I think that will really help us, as well as all the other things that we're doing to make sure that we're listening. We will, and so far we've got really great feedback from colleagues that have been involved in the development and the build processes so far. So the release that we've got coming up in the summer, that we're actively building now and was going really well, is about bringing all that information into one place. That thing that you were talking about earlier on, Belinda, about how do we get consistency of the information that's coming in, and how we deal with information that comes to us. This build of how we bring together notifications and give feedback on care and information to the contact centre all into one place for our colleagues is going to be the way that we can systematise that and make sure that it's consistent. It'll be simpler, it'll be easier for all of our stakeholders, both internally and externally as well. And then, of course, later on in the summer, we move on to the new technologies to help us to plan our assessments, and then an enforcement activity, and then finally towards the end of the year, our single assessment framework. Okay,
and if I may just finish off with the people bit of the report, if that's okay, colleagues. So a slightly fuller people section, and we'll either continue to keep it as part of transformation or we'll have it standalone, what we can decide between now and July. One of the key actions that I've done following the listening, learning and responding to concerns review is to think about what that needed to tell us in terms of who and how we go about our recruitment for our new people director job. So we are now live with our new role. It's got a different job title, small but important change, hopefully. So this is a director for people and culture. And it matters because they're working on behalf of our people, but also critically, we are looking to recruit someone who has expertise and a track record around cultural change that I think would really benefit us as an organisation. So that advert is live, and closing dates are first week in June. So I'm hopeful that we will be successful in that. But I just wanted to demonstrate it's another kind of concrete thing we've done in response to the listening, learning, and responding to concerns review. And then just two other bits briefly. Cultural work, so as Amy says, a component of the cultural activity is underway and in train and no longer needing to have the kind of programme oversight that it's had. And Tyson and his team have been busily having a series of, sounds like very positive workshops around good endings and good beginnings that we've been hearing from his teams about how they've landed. So there is cultural activity happening within operations. Very briefly, the senior leadership team benefited from a cultural expert coming along and spending some time with us at our meeting last week, talking about how you get good cultural change. And what was really interesting from that session was there was a wealth of things that she was recommending you would have in place to ensure that you change your culture. And we actually had broadly all of them already in place in the organisation. And what was interesting about that is it showed me that we've got the right tools, we've got the right building blocks, but I think there's still more we need to do to join it all up together, to articulate it, but also to ensure that we are able to evaluate it's having the impact that we need it to have. So there is some good work happening in the cultural space, particularly within ops, but I think there's more we need to do to make sure it's cross-organisational, but also that it's all tied together and is having the impact we need it to have. And just before I finish and hand over to Tyson to talk to that, we've already mentioned the Pulse survey that is live at the moment with a focus on diversity and inclusion, but also Joyce mentioned earlier the active Pulse survey advisory group that has honed down its priorities, and again that's being distilled into various actions that we as exec teams and members have been lined up to as well. It's okay, I'll hand it.
Tyson, you wanted to add?
Thank you, Kate. Thanks, Ian. Kate and Amy have already talked about our leadership module, the good beginnings, good endings. The only point I was going to make is an email I got earlier today with feedback from Module 1, which is now finished. 82% of people who went on it agreed or strongly agreed that it was a good training course. So I'd like to thank my colleagues in the Academy for putting that together. There's a real sort of positive buzz about it, and Module 2 is about to start.
That's excellent news. We did talk earlier about the need to measure very quickly how this is going, so that's very good. Questions, Mark?
Just very quickly to respond to Kate on that. I mean, I think it's great that we are that we're bringing in additional expertise and experience in relation to cultural change, and I applaud the reshaping of that role. But I'm also enormously encouraged by hearing what exactly what needs to be happening. This is not culture is not something that's parceled up in one person's role. This is a massive cross-functional exercise that's needed to achieve and maintain and sustain a target culture. If you don't do it, cultures form on their own, and it requires leadership at all levels in the organisation. So I'm very encouraged by the approach.
Thanks, Mark. It's a pretty comprehensive report, but any other questions? No? Okay, well, I think, Amy, your written report and the additional contributions from other colleagues, I think that we are done. Thank you very much indeed. Can I just thank you very much indeed for your contribution over the last couple of years. I know you're going to be devastated. You don't have to appear in front of this board every couple of months, but I'm sure you'll get over that in your new role, so good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Why don't we take a well-earned comfort break? If we could be back in 10 minutes' time, that would be appreciated. Thanks. Okay, welcome back for those listening on the video. Welcome back, colleagues. Thank you for joining so promptly. We've got a couple of updates now from, or as we said, on National Guardian, Healthwatch England. So, Jane and Louise, you've been here all morning, but I'll thank you again for joining us. Jane, I think you're first up. Normal rules, we've read the report, so don't need to talk to the detail. However, we don't see you that often, so please do feel free to use the time to make sure we do understand the main points. And I might also, just later on, just ask Stephen if he's anything to add, given your sort of oversight role there. But really, Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, colleagues. And 6 months since I was last here, and the last 2 times has been virtual, so it's really lovely to see you all in person. I'm really important today to be giving an update, not least because of you reflecting on the listening and learning review, and I really welcome that and our work going forward, as we do with many organisations supporting improvement in speak-up culture. So thank you for the invite to do that. As you've said, Chair, take the report as read, but there are a couple of highlights I would like to pull out. The first is just to recognise the increasing growth of the Guardian network. Over 1,000 Guardians now, over nearly 1,000 organisations, not just within the NHS, definitely obviously all NHS trusts and foundation trusts, but also primary care, independent providers, and really importantly as well, national bodies and regulatory bodies. And organisations in other sectors are learning from the model, and that's including education, financial services, and I've recently been contacted by Fire and Rescue and also by the police, the Met, wanting to take learning from us, as well as since I last met you, before Sir Robert left, meeting with Robert with the judiciary around their scheme for improving the judiciary's ability to speak up about wrongdoing within the judiciary. So there's lots of learning there, which is really important to report to you. We continue to collect anonymised data about speaking up cases that are raised with all the Guardians that are on our register, and that, in line with the increase in Guardians, is increasing. Really importantly, the point I make on page 2, the percentage of cases where Guardians are reporting that workers are saying they're experiencing detriment has risen again. It was at a level of around 2.6%. It's now nearly 5%. And I'm increasingly concerned both by the high-profile reports that we see in the news of where people have spoken up, whistleblown, the generic term of speaking up we use because not everyone identifies as a whistleblower, but they've said we're really worried about something, and then they suffer adverse consequences for that. That has a chilling effect on the whole sector. And my message to you, and last week I went to CQC, to their board meeting, to do a similar presentation. I go to them annually, to you twice a year as my host organisation. But what is really, really important is that my ask to you is for us to consider that regulatory response. As I'm not a regulator, what more can we do, both to ensure that detriment is taken really seriously, and I know that's in the new regulatory framework, and I know that our team are working with you on that part of the well-led framework, but to be very clear about the responsibilities of NHS England and yourselves as the regulator to be addressing ongoing detriment, because otherwise it will continue to have that effect, and then people won't speak up, and then bad things will happen to people in receipt of health and care services. What also is, and this is not going to be all doom and gloom, but it is a real stark warning, the NHS staff survey published, and again, last year we saw a decrease in confidence of workers in speaking up, both about clinical safety and also about anything that gets in the way of them doing their role, and their confidence that their workforce will do anything about it. And this year we've seen a bigger decline. Last year I hoped it was a blip, and I think I reported that. This year we're seeing that it doesn't appear to be a blip, and this, we don't know necessarily what it is. Is it the impact of those high-profile cases, of the detriment, of the lack of accountability? I don't know. But I know that we need to work to understand it, because we need to support organisations, you as regulators, NHS England as regulators, and ourselves in the work that the Guardians do within their organisations to turn this around, because to have 4 in 10 of the workforce in the NHS who complete the staff survey saying that they don't feel safe to speak up is a really poor indictment of our services, and a real wake-up call for leaders across the NHS. Really, really important. I want to talk briefly about our new methodology around learning from speaking up handling, and we carried out our first new methodology, Speak Up review of ambulance sector, and you will have seen that. Obviously that had some very poor some poor outcomes in terms of what workers were telling us about their experience, and we've got some significant recommendations, including a wider cultural review of ambulance services, which Minister Quince, the Minister responsible for urgent and emergency care, has taken on board and has appointed NHS England to lead an independent review of culture in ambulance services wider than just Speak Up, but Speak Up very much relating to that. And there are recommendations in there for the ambulance trusts themselves to improve their culture. There's also a recommendation that's for the regulators, yourself and NHS England, again, in terms of how we work and you work to support improvements in Speak Up culture. And I know we're working with you on that, and you're very engaged in that, so thank you. But I wanted to draw that to the board's attention. I also wanted to mention that our ongoing work with our partners, there's a whole section on this, I'm not going to go into it, but the one I want to highlight is the CARC review. I've sat on the steering group with NHS England on implementation of the CARC review, and I spoke the word earlier, it's about accountability, accountability of leaders across the NHS, both executive and non-executive, and particularly, obviously, I was sitting there in relation to the recommendation around serious misconduct, including suppression of whistleblowing or detriment happening to people who speak up. So I've been pleased to be part of that and look forward to the launch of that work. There's been various other work that's detailed here that I'm very happy for you to ask me about. I came last year, it was in December time, to the Audit and Risk Committee and had a very helpful discussion with colleagues who sat on that committee regarding our risk profile. And one of the conversations we had was regarding measuring our impact, both as an office and indeed Freedom Speak Up Guardians. And then that was followed up with a meeting with Mark Chambers here and with David Corner, one of your independent Risk Committee members, which was very helpful, where we all agreed it was incredibly difficult, and it's partly why it's challenging in terms of in the well-led domain assessment of those wider cultural issues, such that I'm looking at the moment to see if we can find some research monies and a commitment from me and my team to see if we can find some research monies to invest to really increase the depth of knowledge we have about impact both of what we're doing and what the Guardians are doing in this space. I think it's self-evident in there the work we're doing around Guardian training and to support. I want to mention the communication section. There's lots of engagement and communication going on, but I did want to thank Ian for coming to our annual conference. We had over 400 Guardians present. It was a mixed hybrid conference, and Ian was speaking about the importance of regulation in the Speak Up space, and Guardians were incredibly welcoming of you being there, taking the time and really recognise and say and want you to hear how important the regulatory function is for them in their organisations to increase focus on improving culture. So thank you for that. We continue to work externally with various partners. The one I wanted to mention was our mental health roundtables. So following Edenfield and the high-profile case there, we pulled together the Guardians who work in mental health space, along with the National Clinical Director for Mental Health, to talk about what more the Guardians could help inform her work and our work going forward. But there are many other areas of work that we're doing externally. I've highlighted our next steps. It's very busy. We're a very small team, but we continue to be absolutely committed to being part of the solution for improving culture, which the current evidence from staff survey and indeed our soon-to-be published Guardian survey is that all is not well. There are some areas of good practice, and if you look at the staff survey, obviously it's an average across all organisations. Some will be improving, and we're doing a deep dive into the most improved organisations so we can learn from those. But clearly overall, there's a decrease, and that should be a worry to us all. It should be a worry to this board in terms of your work on inspection of well-led domain, and certainly to NHS England as well, and it certainly is to us and what we're doing. So I'm really happy to take any questions. I thank you very much for your time. Next time I come, I hope I will have alongside me our new independent chair. So I'm very happy to announce, it was in the governance section, we've appointed Suzanne McCarthy as the independent chair to our accountability and liaison board, which from CQC, Stephen and Mark sit on, but we now have an independent chair, and she only started last week, so her diary was too full for today, so she sends her apologies and she's looking forward to meeting you next time I come back. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Jane. Before I move to just open questions, I wondered if perhaps ask our executive colleagues a couple of things. I mean, firstly, you posited some challenges out there for us as a regulator. But then, secondly, there was a very specific comment in here. Sorry, I won't use diligent page numbers because anyone listening in won't see that, but I think it's page 3 of your report. You said lack of alignment between workers' perceptions, et cetera, et cetera. CQ colleague, people in providers say they felt the red carpet is pulled out when we turn up. I mean, sure, to an element it is. I'd be very surprised if it wasn't to a degree, but I'd be interested in thoughts as to how we can try to counter that view. I don't know who would like to respond, whether they will respond to your challenge and then to my question. Sure, looks like people, your colleagues are friends are pointing at you.
Well, I'm certain that yes, when we inspect a provider site, they have prepared for that inspection and they are anticipating that inspection. They want to put on, give a good account of themselves and how they work and the care that they provide. Having done a number of inspections in the past, I think our inspectors have a more sophisticated methodology that allows them to see beyond what is merely presentational and superficial, perhaps, into the more deeper aspects of how performance is being delivered and how quality is being manifested in their care processes. We have a lot of inspectors have a lot of aids. The CLOEs, the key lines of inquiry, are all designed to take gain a deeper understanding of how care is going. And a lot of our methodology, we talk obviously to patients and staff, and it comes it's consistent or aligned to what you've been saying about speaking up culture, of course, in that we have the ability to speak to staff in a neutral environment and can hear what they want to tell us about how their services are being delivered and what issues they're proud of and what issues they're concerned about. And similarly, we speak to patients and the public about the quality of services that patients are experiencing. So, the red carpet might be in the front foyer in front hall, but we go beyond the front foyer, and we go to places where the red carpet perhaps hasn't been laid out. But I don't blame organisations for wanting to show the good that they're doing. I mean that's right, that they tell us what they're proud of, and we invite them to tell us what they're proud of. But we see beyond that. I think it evidently, from the evidence that we have got as a result of our inspections and the inspection reports we write.
May I just respond to that, Ian? So thank you ever so much, Sean. I mean, what we were hearing from some workers was the feeling that they were given scripts, and also that they were sometimes put in a position where there was a manager there overseeing what they were saying. And I think that's what they were trying to feed back. Methodology is always improving, I know, and you're working really hard at that. So it's just that reflection back that to do even more to ensure that workers have a safe voice, because they don't always feel safe to say what they need to say.
Can I just respond to that briefly? Where we have seen evidence that managers have been close to where the conversations are taking place, we have very frequently invited staff to a neutral venue where they can speak freely without the risk of fearing that they're being overheard or observed by people who they feel they are accountable to in other ways.
Certainly on inspection, I went on, just for the record, the people, our team, were much better than that and saw through what was being scripted. So, but maybe it happens, but lots of hands going up, and I don't know whether the new points are responding to that. So, Ian.
I was going to say what Sean's just said.
Okay.
Yeah, that was broadly my... The only additional thing I'd say is that the triangulation of experts by experience views and the views of colleagues in the organisation is really critical. And often you can begin to... I can think of cases recently where people have offered a script, and often then you hear an expert by experience, and often then they've unpicked their script and they said, oh, actually, no, I don't mean that, I mean this. And I think the ability to help people tell the truth of the story of where they are and as an organisation is critical. And there's a couple of examples very recently in where we've taken exactly that approach. And I think it ultimately helps the organisation understand what they've got to do to change more quickly.
Stephen, you wanted to add? I'll come to you, Mark.
We touched earlier in relation to the LLR report about freedom to speak up within CQC, so we don't need to cover that again. A couple of other points just to draw to the board's attention. The first is one about scope. Currently, the freedom to speak up concept and model doesn't apply in social care. Personally, I think there could be benefits if it did, but we're not there yet, and so that's a sort of discussion for the future about what do we see as the scope of the freedom to speak up model. The second one, it's alluded to in Jane's report, is there is a bit of a risk of organisations designating a freedom to speak up guardian and saying, right, job done. But if that person has no protected time, they've got no support, they've got no backup really from the organisation, there's actually very little they can do, and the staff concerned will very quickly see that, and that will be one reason why kind of trust in the model may be eroding. So it's important for us, I think, in the NGO to try to keep raising awareness of that point, that if freedom to speak up guardians are to work to full effect in creating confidence amongst staff in the ability to speak up, they do themselves need to be properly supported, and they need the time and the backup and the support and the training to carry out that function well. Otherwise, you may just have a person who's actually too busy with their normal workload to do anything about this. So I think it's something we just need to keep monitoring.
Thank you very much, Stephen. If I may come back, Chair, just on the adult social care front, thank you for raising that. It's one of the many areas in the report covered. Obviously, the first day I started, December the 1st, 2021, it was announced in the white paper that there would be funding to pilot adult social care freedom to speak up models. And then we've been working with the Department of Social Care for since then, up until about 6 weeks ago, when there was a ministerial change of heart in terms of the amount of investment into that white paper, and that was one of the things that got postponed, delayed, hopefully not shelved. I've left an open door to, we would like to work with them, with the appropriate funding. And I know from speaking with Kate and colleagues here within CQC that that's something that you're, very keen to consider. And particularly within integrated care systems, to have part of an integrated care system being assessed around their speak up culture and another where that's not doesn't have the same potentiality is disappointing, but something we'll certainly keep raising the profile of. And on the point of the freedom to speak up guardian resource, that is absolutely key. And I would say as well, just to remind the board, and I know I've said it on the 2 previous occasions I've come, this is not just about guardians. This is about overarching speak up culture, and it's just as important that every single manager in any organisation, CQC or providers of care, are absolutely aware of all the different routes where people can have their voice heard, be it about patient safety or well-being or fraud, whatever. And the guardian role is that additional safety route, along as should be as well an agent of cultural change within your organisations. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay. I had said Mark next, and I'll come to you, Blessing. Mark.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, Jane, and thank you for the work that you and your team do. We know how unbelievably important this is. Yes, people ought to have multiple channels to escalate their concerns, but you know, your team are there for people, quite often for people who have no other channel or feel they have no other channel, and that the difference that makes is immense. Just responding on the few things. Responding on the how do you show impact? Yeah, I think it is challenging. I think there are bits of it that we can definitely do. You know, speak up culture definitely drives trust. There's plenty of evidence around that. But you know, perhaps if there was going to be a little bit of a broader search in relation to that, it could be, you know, one theme perhaps to explore might be, you know, other elements of risk management where you're heading off a risk of something really bad happening, but how do you show that it might, you know, if you hadn't been there, the risk would have been increased. So risk functions, control functions, legal functions have much the same battle when they're defending their resources. It would have been much worse if I hadn't been there. Well, prove it. So maybe some lateral thinking might help. Very happy to help with some introductions if that would be useful. This is not to undermine your point at all. I was actually quite surprised at 4.8% detriment because I thought it was low. That, you know, there are benchmarks I think we are missing. We're not hearing about an awful lot, and I suspect the position is worse than that. There are some corporate benchmarks which show that as high as 40%, and that's and you know, that's pretty horrific. If you think, you know, nobody's going to do it twice if they hear that 2 out of 5 people have suffered detriment. So it's absolutely vital that you're hammering away, and that we're all hammering away on that point, because, you know, unless there is the clearest possible institutional intolerance of detriment, unless there are, you know, robust processes for tracking and identifying it, unless there are the most concrete and fail-safe protections for individuals who do speak up, this is going to undermine everything that you're trying to achieve. So I really worry about that. And then my final point was just I suppose building on Stephen's point about how do you support people in a role which is a part of their other role, and particularly the risk if their manager thinks, you know, not perhaps surprisingly, is more focused on delivery of the day job than this other thing for, you know, as part of the NGO network. You have a job description, for a universal job description of a guardian. Do you have a universal job description or something that could be slipped in for a manager's role profile to show what was expected of them as if they're the line manager of a guardian?
Thank you. I'll take the last one, and then if I could comment on one of the others as well. In terms of, that's a really interesting suggestion, and one that I'll take away. As part of the CARC review work, we were discussing it's all very well having an accountability framework if things go wrong for senior managers within the NHS, but what are we doing in terms of training and support to make sure they have the right behaviours, culture and knowledge to execute their jobs? And part of that I was contributing, saying actually those expectations around managing people speaking up is really key. So I hope that will be taken on board, but actually whether there is something more that could be done is really worth exploring with the various bodies and professional bodies. I've been talking recently to the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the Nursing and Midwifery Regulator, suggesting that maybe within the revalidation work, freedom to speak up and responsibilities around that for every nurse, not just nurse leaders, could be considered. And they've said that they'll put it into the next review as an idea as they're taking that forward. So that sort of concurs with that. Thank you. In terms of the detriment figure, if I may just make an observation on that, indeed it doesn't reflect as highly as one might expect. I'm worried because it's going up from our original figures. It may be that at the point at which they're reporting to the Guardians, and the Guardians are reporting to us, that the detriment hasn't yet become apparent. So that could be an underestimation anyway. But yes, I take that on board. It is not as high, but as you've said, you weren't undermining it. You were just saying it could be a lot worse. And of course, that's detriment through the speaking up route. There could be a lot of detriment happening from speaking up to your line manager or going direct to, you know, your board, senior people, etc.
Well, and that's helpful to know, because the organisations that do this really well follow up with people quite a long time afterwards, because you know, the retaliation is often quite insidious and not timely. It's spread over time. So tracking how people do on subsequent job application, internal job applications, that sort of thing is useful. It requires a huge commitment if you're really going to track that well.
It does, and it would be a commitment to ask you to think about as an organisation with your new Director of People and Culture, and you know how you might consider tracking potential detriment from people speaking up through whatever route and outcomes. And it's certainly something that we encourage boards to be thinking about, and it's something that I want to talk with you about in terms of the well-led domain and how you inspect against this.
Thanks, Jane. Blessing, sorry, we kept you waiting.
Thank you. Jane, you mentioned that you collect anonymized data for the freedom, raised through freedom to speak up. Do you know the demographic makeup of people who are speaking up or facing the detriment? I actually have 3 questions for you.
That's okay. Thank you very much. It's mixed. Not all organisations report on protected characteristics of those who are speaking up, and it's something that we're looking at this year as to whether we can mandate that. Okay. My understanding is, before I started, that there was a reluctance to have a huge data suite that came to us from the Guardians, but we know that over 50% of Guardians report that internally for themselves, but that means, you know, it's still not all. So I'm looking, as we do our data review this year, because I think it's really important that we do ask Guardians to report on that, because we know from the work during the pandemic and a lot of international research that people from minority ethnic backgrounds and in other protected characteristic groups both find it harder to speak up and very often have more detriment, more retaliatory referrals to professional bodies. So it's something that's really important for us to look at this year. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you. And also, how do we ensure safety in speaking up, whether anonymously or not?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's down to organisational culture, Blessing, because absolutely all routes are speaking up, both anonymous and I know anonymous is an important route, and some people don't feel safe to speak up other than anonymously. Obviously, you have less opportunity to go back and follow up and find out more, but it's still an important route. So whichever route, whether people are happy for it to remain confidential or indeed to be open about it, it's the response, it's the listening and the following up that are key, and that's the key role of managers and leaders in organisations. And we've got a long way to go across the board.
Thank you. And the last question, what do you recommend for safe speak-up culture in any organisation?
The short answer, Jan.
Short answer is make it a priority, is ensure that everybody, from board to every frontline worker, understands individual responsibilities, collective responsibilities, and it's a daily conversation, because it's not a strategy paper. Yes, it's important to have a policy and a guardian and things like that, but actually it's everyday conversations that I have with my line manager, that I have with my colleagues, that we have as teams, that makes the culture one where my ideas are welcome, where I can safely say, I think there's a better way of doing it, or I'm really worried about this, or have we thought about. It's those sorts of cultures that's ones that I want to work in, and I'm sure we all do. So it's everyday conversations and keeping it is just as important as performance, because without good speak-up culture, you don't have good performance and safety.
Thank you, Jane.
Thanks very much indeed, Jane. Unless there are any burning questions, I suggest we follow hold of that. But Jane, thank you very much indeed. Not particular actions exactly, but lots of food for thought for us and for you. So we look forward to seeing you again in 6 months' time, subject to diaries with your new chair as well. Louise, Healthwatch England, usual rules. We have read it, but we only get to see you every 6 months. So feel free to draw attention to key things. And then, as I did before, since Belinda has been acting on an interim basis, the chair might just ask her to comment around if she wishes.
Thank you, Chair. And it's similar to what Jane said. It's been great to be here for the whole meeting, and my team are working with and supporting colleagues in the CQC and doing what we can to support the LLRC review, including really good relationships between local Healthwatch and the regional CQC teams, and how we feed data in terms of things like give feedback on care. And so we'll continue to try and work together well on that. So I'm not going to go through the report, but I'm going to just mention a couple of things. So yesterday, our committee meeting in public was I think our interim chair, Belinda's last meeting to chair, because we're due to have a new permanent chair soon. And on behalf of the Healthwatch England committee and the team, we want to thank Belinda for her absolutely excellent and supportive and appropriately challenging time as interim chair of Healthwatch England. And at that committee, it was an important one for us because it saw the launch of our new strategy, 2023 to 26, our future focus. And that strategy has got 3 key themes in it: supporting more people who are heard the least to feed in their experience of health and care, to support the health and care system to listen better and act on what they hear, and the third area, to underpinning that, to be a stronger organisation and network. It is very good bedtime reading, so if you go onto our website, you will see the full strategy there. We're going to continue to build our focus on primary care, which I talk about a little bit in this report, on social care and particularly on women's health, amongst other areas. And we're going to continue to deliver our statutory duty to support the network of local Healthwatch, there are 152 of them across England, and improve particularly their financial viability. So I'm going to leave it there, but very happy to answer any questions on anything in the report.
Belinda, apart from thanking people for their congratulations, anything you wish to add?
Just a couple of things. I think I'm always impressed by how much Healthwatch England do for such a small organisation and the massive reach that they appear to have for such a small budget. So, the budget is obviously an ongoing concern for Healthwatch England because whilst they didn't receive a cut this year, they received the same as they did last year, which is essentially a cut. So I know that funding is an issue that keeps Louise and her team awake at night. So that's an ongoing concern for the team. And I just wondered, Louise, if you could just talk a little bit more about the main themes that the public speak to Healthwatch across the country about, and therefore Healthwatch England, and what happens as a result of those expressions of concern.
Yes, thanks, Belinda. So by far and away the biggest area of concern, biggest area of feedback we get is about primary care, and hence that being a continued focus for us in our strategy going forwards. Many people, very large numbers of people, are satisfied with GP services, fewer with dentistry, and then we're finding out much more about people's satisfaction with pharmacy and optometry, and we're likely to do more work in those areas. But you'll see in the report that the British Social Attitude Survey does show that satisfaction with GP services in particular is at an all-time low. And this does reflect the experience that people talk to us about. It's still the biggest trend. People talk to us about their frustrations about the 8 a.m. window for getting appointments, time spent on hold, which causes particular problems for people with pay-as-you-go phones, and we've done quite a lot of work this year on the impact of the cost of living crisis on people's access to healthcare, which I'm happy to talk more about. Only same-day appointments being available when the issue isn't urgent, having to wait many weeks for an appointment. I could go on because there's quite a long list of frustrations there. So we were very happy. We fed all of these through to Department of Health and to NHS England. And we were very pleased to see that in developing the primary care recovery plan, most of those issues had a response, and a number of the things in the primary recovery plan should help to, over time, if implemented across the country, alleviate some of those frustrations. And people do know that the system is under pressure, people do know that there are workforce issues, but we have to faithfully report back what people are telling us in terms of their key concerns, and that's one of them.
Good, thanks. Colleagues, any questions or comments for Louise? Chris?
Just a comment really to say the work you do is vital to our work in terms of understanding not just how individual providers work, but how people experience care across an area, across a system. And as we go into this year and look at our work on particular topics like access to services, like the performance of services, particularly initial treatment services, and the impact that has on adult social care and urgent emergency care, I think there's more work that we can collectively do to drive the voice of people into the decision-making process. So thank you for the work you've done. I know your team do a fantastic job working with my team and local health watches. It will be a feature of our work in state of care this year, as it always is. And just to sort of formally record my thanks to you.
Do a couple of questions from me. There's both related to integrated care systems, but probably two-way round question, one for you and then one for my colleagues maybe. But what's your take or view on the role of local health watch in making a success or helping ICSs be successful? There's probably a theoretical and what are you seeing on the ground so far type question. And then I suppose more from our perspective, and maybe I should ask one of the CQC colleagues, is, I mean, you've highlighted things, you say a dangerous blind spot in the NHS, understanding the challenges for people just getting on the waiting list in the first place. You picked up other things like only half of practices actually had decent digital phone systems. I mean, this is, well, the first is a bit more subjective, but close to factual. The second is just factual. Whether or not we are going to be able to pick that sort of stuff up and make use of it in our assessments. I know we're not rating digital systems of general practices, but if you've got information that suggests things could be done better at a local level, how or to what extent is our assessment? Because I understand it, we wouldn't be assessing that, but we might be considering whether or not the ICS itself was looking at that sort of information. And if so, how are they accessing it? So they both are on the same theme, but I think one is your perception and the other is for us.
Yes, and actually Kate was there on the same day when I gave evidence to the Health and Social Care Committee about how well integrated care systems are doing in terms of their accountability, including their accountability to local people. And I was able to talk about the good progress that we think around half of integrated care systems have made in terms of involving the groups of local health watch on their patch. Now, it's a bit complicated, and I won't go into the detail, but some integrated care systems have got up to 14 health watch in their area, and in other areas, one health watch is covering more than one ICS. So it's and some are coterminous. And what we are seeing generally is, as I say, around half of integrated care systems are involving Healthwatch in their governance. They're certainly supporting Healthwatch to work together so that insight flows into the integrated care strategies that all ICBs, or rather ICPs, have published. And also, because we obviously help design the Working with People and Communities guidance, all of the ICSs, I feel, have taken a certain step up from the world of CCGs in taking community engagement, particularly with those who suffer the worst health inequalities, much more seriously. So Local Health Watch always worked well with CCGs, and obviously with health review scrutiny committees and the other kind of frameworks, and now mostly they're working well with ICSs, but there's still some way to go. And in terms of the kind of how this then feeds into change locally, we've got hundreds of really good examples of specific areas where Local Health Watch have worked with the service, or it's developing on an ICS footprint that they'll identify issues on a thematic basis or on a kind of population basis, and really good change will be made. And actually we're feeding quite a lot of some of those examples into NHS England for the work on NHS 75, and there's lots of really good work going on there. In terms of the relationship between CQC teams and Healthwatch locally, that's often on the basis of risk-based inspection rather than kind of thematic feedback. And when Healthwatch hear directly from people that they're worried about a particular service, the aspiration is that inspectors will consistently and always make sure that it happens most of the time at the moment, but that there is a greater level of consistency in terms of that relationship always being switched on and fluid, and inspectors and assessors taking action when provider issues are being flagged via Healthwatch.
Tyson first.
Thank you, and hi Louise. I was interested in the report about how you've managed to raise awareness of your organisation amongst those facing health inequalities, and I wondered how you had done that, because I suspect we might have something to learn from it.
Yes, thank you, Tyson. So, in a very purposeful way, we've done things like more digital marketing spend aimed at people with protected characteristics. But we've kind of doubled down on our previous strategy in terms of our commitment to focus on those who suffer the worst health inequalities. So every single project we run, we have in mind who we're targeting. So you'll see from our and in mind the intersectionalities that also people live with. So if you look at our work, for example, on cost of living recently, we also saw that within that, some younger people on benefits, and women were suffering more detriment in terms of the cost of living and the impacts on their ability to access healthcare, pay for prescriptions, pay for travel, pay for broadband telephony. So we're very conscious and purposeful at the beginning of each of our projects in terms of who we're targeting, the data we're going to analyse, and then how we're going to feed that into the system for change.
Can I just go back to my second part of my questions? That's from our point of view. So, try to get this right. So, I mean, say we're not picking. If we go in and look at what an ICS is doing, the way it is making assessments of the needs locally, would we know if the sort of the responses we were getting were inconsistent with information held by Healthwatch England?
So that Healthwatch are very much part of the conversation that we'll have around our assessment of ICSs. So there's a really good information sharing procedure so that I think, as you rightly said, not all ICSs are in the same space for this, but I think what we are trying to do is collectively capture what we know from people who use services, and Healthwatch are an enormously important partner in that respect. We also use it to gather what's working well. It's interesting that the NHS 75 information you push back is something that we requested as part of NHS 75. The idea was that we would have, it sounds a bit cheesy when you say it out loud, but 75 cases of innovation and good practice that we could share at the event. So that was something that I know we're holding it collectively with England, but that was something that we wanted to promote, partly to help ICSs think their way into how they involve people who use services in the redevelopment and redesign of their service. So to answer your question directly, they are an important partner when we go in to assess. They're also an important partner in terms of spotting innovation and good practice, and we'll use that together partly for our assessment, but also for how we're going to champion that work. So if you look on our website at the moment, you can see good practice around technology, around different aspects of innovation, driven from sometimes the conversations we have with providers, but often driven from the conversations we had at the system level as well.
Joyce, you wanted to add?
I was just going to add that we look at it from two aspects within the assessment framework, both how we get the information, so we can see what's happening by place or in a certain geography, but also within the ICS assessment, we'd be asking the ICS how they use information from the people and communities that are in their system and what action they have taken in response to that as well. So there are two ways by which we use the information and get the voices of people into our assessment.
I suppose, I don't want to dwell on the question, but I suppose I was really thinking of, if we do the second, do we know to what extent can we use information that we have access to check whether or not it's right. But anyway, I think that you've answered the question. Thank you very much. If there are no other questions for Louise, doesn't look like it. So, Louise, thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for taking the time and effort to thank Belinda. And Belinda, can I thank you on behalf of the board for spending a not inconsiderable amount of additional time acting as an interim chair of HWE. So, continuing as we sit here. So, thank you very much indeed for that. Let's move on to the business plan. After a false start, this time I think we are going to be joined by Steph Tarrant from your team, Chris. I'll hand over to you and Steph to take us through the session. Just a word of explanation to anyone listening in. The business plan that was circulated with the pack, and those listening in may have seen, was the draft at that time. These sort of meetings are not the right forum for doing detailed drafting. So we did say to board colleagues, if they had any comments, could they feed them in offline? There were a number of comments. So those around the table have actually got a slightly revised version, which we haven't put up on the website. It's not radically different, but some changes have been made. So, Chris, I'll hand over to you, but I think between the two of you, it might be helpful if you could just, without turning the pages, give us an understanding of what has changed as a result of feedback since the version that people would have read in the first place, if that's okay.
I will do an intro, and then Steph might be able to pick up some of the detailed changes. So, just as a reminder, we bought the business plan here in March, but the key thing we want to reflect on was the LLR C review, which was at the same session. So we've taken that back, and hence why we're now back at board. The plan, we've aligned the plan to our strategy, which ensures planning and performance has a clear link from strategy down to day-to-day regulatory activities. The plan will be complemented with a wider performance framework and corporate risk register. So for the purposes of for this purpose, our plan focuses on key areas of delivery and commitment across the period. The key bit to note, and it came up in other points before, is that we'll have a catalogue of KPIs in the background. We can pull these out and report to board at any time. We talked before about some of the HR metrics and how we report on them. So the introduction does reference that we intend to review the key results in the plan as we deliver on key pieces of transformation throughout this year. We have big aspirations for our performance and delivery, and the success of our transformation will be a key part towards this. They were the kind of brief bits I wanted to say. Steph, I don't know if you want to touch on the things that have changed since last saw the plan.
Thank you. So there's three main measures that have changed since the last plan in March. So the first was around the safeguarding. So what we've done in this is we've learned from the listening, learning, responding review, and we've looked at how we've allocated time to those real critical measures, those real critical safeguarding and whistleblowing and information we receive where it's time critical that we respond. So rather than it being 1 day and then straight to 5 days, we've split it between 1 day, 3 days and 5 days in terms of how we mitigate action. So that's the first key change. The other is we've introduced two measures where we had placeholders, one for speaking up and the other one about a cultural milestone about our plans for how we're going to listen wider as an organisation. Since the draft, we have made some small amendments in terms of out of hours as well, included that. And there's also now an introduction and a forward in there that wasn't in the plan that came in March. Since the published version to this, the only changes are in the introduction, so there's an extra paragraph from the published version to the version that board members have got, which has a bit of an extra paragraph around the context of that plan, which is what Chris has covered in the introduction, about how this plan will be supplemented by the performance framework, and also our commitment as we go through our transformation that we will revisit these measures. So although the business plan runs across 3 years, what we're keen to do is over the 6 and 12 12-month mile mark, really look at these key results as we deliver on pieces of transformation. We'll have new data sets as a result of regulatory platform and be able to really hold ourselves to account to those new data sets.
So thanks. So can I turn over to my colleagues? I mean, we are being asked to approve this. We've seen little bits of it several times over the last little while, but I think the version that was circulated with these papers, or indeed before these papers, was probably the first time for a while people have seen the whole document. So there's quite a lot that's consistent with the previous year. It's not radically different, but there are changes, and certainly the metrics that we are identifying to measure our performance have increased significantly, I guess, over that time. What isn't included in the pack, but Steph kindly sent me separately, is a document listing where we are with the metrics that we'll be using. So in a number of those, importantly, we have got a baseline. So the plan does tend to say, you know, we're going to improve, but clearly you can only measure that if there's a baseline. So the document doesn't have all of that in, but we do have a starting point identified. So when performance reports, we'll be able to say improvement against a number that may not be in the plan, but it does exist. And there are other cases where we're still trying to work out, since we've expanded the reporting, both how we do it and what the baseline is. So it's at one level not quite the finished article, but I certainly I was satisfied looking at the stuff you sent me, Steph, that we've done as much as we can now to be clear about what we're going to measure and where we know what the starting point is. It's always helpful to just say that, but colleagues, so we're being asked to approve it. So questions, comments? Blessing, you're first.
Hi, Stephanie. Just wanted to ask, on the data that you're collecting for safeguarding and whistleblowing, will there be any room to collect protected characteristics for that or not?
So in the first 6 months or 6 to 9 months, we'll be using the existing system of CRM, but in terms of the regulatory transformation, it's already being captured in terms of that capturing protected characteristics of people that contact us is really vital. And I think when we talk in the introduction about wanting to change the measures as the transformation project delivers, that will be, for me, one of the key things that we'll look at, and really looking at understanding about how we use that different information and whether there's any correlation in terms of our activity. So certainly not for the first bit, but absolutely that is what our intentions are.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, one of the things I found, we touched on another example earlier, but I found interesting listing. I joined the regulatory group that Mark chaired. Is part of the work we do is look at things that we might want to measure, and if we haven't necessarily got the data we want, and we were talking about out of hours working beforehand, you know, this now gives us the option to get a better measurement of data, so we can do it much better. So there are really quite a lot of examples like that weren't there in the Mark, which is shows that the worth of the group, of the committee, but also that with the new systems are going to be able to respond. Stephen and then Mark.
Just one point, which is really a question to Kate, I guess. It's accepting that we've had opportunities to comment on all of this. Looking at it now in the light of our discussions about people and culture, is this sufficiently well aligned with what we were saying earlier? Because I think you've commented on a number of ways in which, through the reporting to the board on the transformation programme particularly, we'll get new and better metrics, but they're not flowing through into the business plan. And I wonder whether we should just look again at the alignment between what you're proposing to report to the board and the commitments and indicators we use for the business plan about improving our whole approach to people and culture.
So just to bring Steph into the discussion we had earlier this afternoon, Steph, so we have committed to bringing a kind of people pack every quarter to board, updating on the kind of life cycle of colleagues joining the organisation, being inducted, etc. So we need to just ensure there's a good alignment between the two of them. In this plan, we talk about the need to deliver on a cultural plan, and obviously it talks about how there's more work to be done to define what that cultural plan is and to hit milestones. So this will have the home for the this will be the home for where all that activity will sit. And absolutely there will be alignment. So we're not going to be having two separate discussions about here's our people data, here's our culture data, without it being neatly joined into this.
To answer your question, Stephen? Yeah. Mark?
One of the things that we have in here is, commitment to develop better productivity metrics going forward. Given the the importance of efficiencies as part of the business case for transformation, when are we going to see this in a form that we think is near final?
I think that's probably. I mean, I share your wish to improve our efficiency productivity measures. We've got one at the moment, but I don't think it captures all the things we want it to capture. I think that's an area we should look at the half year point when we look to refresh the business plan. We've got, as I keep saying, we've got an awful lot of training to be done amongst a lot of teams in operations over that period, and so I'd like to sort of develop that in parallel and then have a discussion about whether that's the time in which we start to introduce it.
Kate?
So if that's the finishing of the comments, could I just very briefly say a massive thank you to Steph? So I think it's been quite an epic effort to get to this point, and it's not a finished product. It's not, it's our business plan as of now. We're going to tweak it. We're going to reflect on it and check in throughout the year. But just a massive thank you, Steph, for what you've done in capturing many people's views on this as well.
I haven't quite finished yet. Actually, I was going to make 2 points. One was very similar to yours, I think, but this is a major step forward in terms of the quality of what we're trying to do and some of the insights. So I think we have to accept the fact that it may not be, rather than spending another 2 months just looking for absolute perfection, it'd be great to agree it so the management know what they're doing. We don't want to be fiddling with it every month or every quarter, whatever it's going to be, but equally, it is relatively new, so we have the opportunity to stand back 6 months, whatever it's going to be. But I think approving at that basis, it's not a subject to, but just recognition it might move on. I did have one, just to benefit of colleagues, I would like to make a few tiny changes to the introduction, primarily because we define LLRC quite extensively in the context of external things at the top, and then there's a throwaway line in the last paragraph about an internal review. Doesn't quite make the point that it's joined up. So I'd like to tweak that, but that's clarification, not in any way substantive. But if people are happy to approve on the basis, I'll sort some words out with Ian, who's co-signing, and Steph. That'd be great. So we are being asked to approve it. Are people happy to approve it on that basis? Okay, that's great. So thank you very much. And I don't need to thank you. She's already done it, but thank you. I do appreciate it. Right, we're right back on time. So we have some minutes in the pack of the previous meeting. They were circulated in advance. Any comments on those, or can I take them as a agreed record of the meeting? Yes, okay, they are approved. I don't know whether this is a good or a bad thing, but we have absolutely no actions left to complete, so that element of the discussion is very straightforward. Mark, we've referred a couple of times today to the RGC. Had a meeting the other day. Could you give us a brief oral update?
Sure, very happy to. A few of these points have arisen earlier in the meeting as well, so that's always good to see. Just as a reminder, there are kind of two things that we do at RGC. One we're developing a continuing to iterate a core pack which appears every meeting, which covers changes to the design of our regulatory model, proactive improvements that we're making ourselves, responses to external developments, a set of KPIs around how we're delivering against that model. Are we actually managing to do what we plan to do? And then a review of internal and external insights to how effective it's being in delivering the outcome that we want the model to deliver. So a lot of that's the core pack. And then on top of that, we do a program of deep dives. Some of the things that came out of the core pack this time are continued reassurance that our, I think as came out earlier, that our risk-based approach to is helping us identify and better target risk of harm. We're getting to that in a more targeted and better way, so that's good news. Tyson talked earlier about the work that we need to do on out of hours inspections. We need to make sure that, if we're reporting and commenting on an out of hour inspection, it really is one that was, designed and intended and to be conducted outside business hours and is substantially completed in outside business hours, not one that just happens to roll past 5:30. So, and I think it's an indication that we need to sort of tighten up that definition. We have sort of blended in previously some inspections that have simply started early or finished late. And of course, when we do build that extra capability to do more of this, which we really want to do, and Tyson highlighted some of the organisational changes that we need to do before we have that extra capability. When we do have it, we'll need to deploy it against areas of greatest risk. So we'll be revisiting that at the committee in Q4. We looked again at, one of our regular looks has been the time taken to get reports published. How quickly can we get the information that we're finding out to the public? That is continuing to improve. I think an area that we need to look at, and we'll look at in more detail at the next meeting, is variance. What's the pattern? Averages only tell you so much. We talked at a previous meeting. We looked at a previous meeting at something that is in our toolkit, and we should pull out of the toolkit more often. Is our ability to suspend a rating for a provider. We've had another example of where we've done that, but our view is that we ought to do it more. It was a good response this time. We acted very fast, but it's a tool that I think we should be more willing to use. We also looked at are we getting the balance right in terms of the support that we're providing to assistance to other organisations. I think we need to make sure that where it's all helpful and it's all well received, but we need to make sure that there's that we probably over time seek to shrink that rather than grow that, and make sure that there's a clear linkage to our core purpose when we're doing that. Our deep dive this time was on registration and looking, obviously our registration process is intended to identify and only let through providers that we're confident will achieve the standards required for a good rating. Now, we can't guarantee that because a lot of the time, of course, these are plans rather than practices that people are describing for us. But a significant number of providers, when they are first time inspected by us subsequently, do not achieve those standards. So we've had a good look at that to learn what we can use, what we can learn from that to tailor and focus our registration process. It proved to be quite a difficult question, and one that we don't have all the answers to yet. There are definitely some factors about things that change, contributory factors about things that change between registration and first inspection, but we need to do a more in-depth study on that, which we will come back to possibly later this year. Our next meeting, our next deep dive is going to be on complaints, and that's something that we do look at a board level, but I think it will be useful for us to have more time to dig into that deeper at a committee level. But it was another good meeting, and thank you everyone for the effort put in to produce some very high quality papers. Thank you to George for his support for the committee, and thank you to members for and contributors for what was, I think, a pretty good discussion.
Good, thanks very much indeed, Mark. Anything to add from fellow committee members or management, or any questions for Mark? No, Mark, you're scot-free. Okay, I think that almost brings us to the end of formal business. Any other business? There are something I want to mention, but let me start with others. Any other business people want to raise? No. The two things for me, one is just simply an omission. I'm casting my eye back over the notes I was making during the meeting, and my apologies for those, the transformation, but you did mention some significant steps forward on the technology side. So I think we should have congratulated you on that. It's very useful to see deliverables come through. So I'll do it now, and apologies that I didn't do it earlier. The main AOB, I just wanted to make sure everyone's aware that this will be Jora's last board meeting. Jora is by a significant margin the longest standing member of this board. He served 2 full times as a non-executive director, and that expired in the autumn. He very kindly agreed to stay on for another couple of 3-month terms as an associate non-executive director, something that we're able to do ourselves. But he is looking at other things, indeed has been asked to take on other things, and we've agreed that it would simply be unfair to ask him to extend again. He has, as I mentioned, 1 or 2 people agreed to be available should there be any ongoing questions. And you've got another week with us, it's your last board meeting. So I think on behalf of everybody, just like to thank you for, I know from the management point of view, been very grateful for your insights and support. I've only been here a year, but been a valuable member of the board. So can I just thank you formally very much indeed for your very significant contribution to CQC. So thank you very much indeed, Jora. In terms of the formal business, that concludes it, but we do have questions from the public. So we will just quickly take those. We have 3 questions from Mr. Pike. 2 I'm going to hand to Joyce and 1 to Sean. I'm hoping the system has worked and you know about these. The first question is, how does CQC intend to obtain views from members of the public when it appraises the performance of integrated care services? Joyce, I think you can respond to that.
Thank you. And it's a good question. It links to our early discussion with Louise and Healthwatch. So we use the term people's experiences throughout our assessment framework, and this covers people's needs, expectations, lived experience, and their satisfaction with access to service, care, support, and treatment. And our assessment framework has uniquely been built involving people to say what good looks like from the services that they would expect. So our assessment framework is built on those standards, and it then becomes, it's actually linked into the heart of how we collect evidence and make our judgments as well. We will use a variety of methods to collect information through surveys, information from partners, from Healthwatch, like we said, from the ICS themselves, from the integrated care systems themselves. How do they get feedback from people they receive? We will also get information from providers, and then we'll also do our own work talking to people and communities and pathway track within local systems. We are committed to ensure that we get the experiences for people most likely to receive poor access experience and outcomes. And we also want to, Chris talked earlier about give feedback of care, which is increasing, rising as a number of people contact us. We also want to be able to use that information, analyse that information to provide even further information across systems and where people are at place where they have a local authority and their neighbourhood services.
Thanks so much, Joyce. And another question for you. Excuse me. What process does CQC currently have in place for reviewing the classifications of outstanding good, requires improvement and inadequate?
So I think that's another good question as well. We keep our frameworks under constant review through engagement and through consultation, and where necessary we have updated sections like our rating characteristics to keep pace with best practice, rising public expectations and recommendations from other agencies. That's previously been on a cycle of about every 5 years, but with the introduction of our new single assessment framework, we'll be far more responsive, particularly in relation to best practice and standards. So our new approach will be able to use evidence and scoring, and we'll make quality judgments to produce ratings, and we'll be quite transparent exactly in terms of how we reduce the ratings. I just wanted to know if the question is asked about the classification itself, the fact that we use a 4-point scale, that's not our decision, that would be with the Department of Health.
I wasn't entirely sure of the question, but thank you for making that absolutely clear. And then finally, Sean, a question for you. During hospital inspections, how does CQC assess the quality of a hospital's communications with patients?
Thank you. Yes. Well, when we assess the quality of communication with patients, there's a number of things in particular that we're interested in. So these would include how well staff communicate with patients directly, how well the hospital shares important information with patients, especially patient safety information, and whether they share that in a way that is accessible. And then also how well hospitals engage with patient interest groups. When we perform inspections, clearly we have a number of approaches. We do direct observation of all of those things. We talk to patients and staff, and we review documentation that will provide us with evidence to help guide inspectors when they're doing inspections and looking at this particular function of trust. There are a number of key lines of inquiry in our guidance, especially in the caring and well-led domains. And for example, there are numerous questions, but a couple of examples would be under caring 2.1, do staff communicate with patients so that they understand their condition, their treatment, and their care? And under well-led, for example, well-led Chloe 7.2, are patients, carers and families actively engaged in decision-making around care and treatment? So those are just a couple of examples of the guidance that we have for inspectors when they're looking at communications with patients.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sean. That answers the questions. So I think to anyone listening, we have finished. Thank you very much for listening in to my board colleagues. Thank you for your time. It's been another long session this afternoon. A blessing. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.